How to Move the Stars by Jacob Lemansky. Chapter 12, Mongolia. July 24th, 2013. Into Mongolia. Drops of rain hitting my face pulled me from my sleep. The sky was black and the storm was blowing through. I pulled my bivvy over my head and went back to sleep. By morning, clouds had gone and the sun was rising into a clear blue sky. Mark and I pedaled 25 miles to Tushanta, the last town of Russia, a quiet outpost sitting among grassy hills. I walked into the border station to let them examine my documents. The agent was a kind man in his 50s, sitting behind a desk in the sparse one-room building. I handed him my passport, and he asked for something more, but I couldn't understand him. On his old desktop computer, he pulled up a translation website to explain that there is a Russian law requiring all foreigners to register at a hotel before leaving the country. I vaguely knew of this rule from my visa paperwork. The first hotel I stayed at was 9 days into Russia. I considered asking about the document, but communicating was difficult, and once the opportunity passed, I never asked again. I figured the paperwork wouldn't matter anyway. Today, I learned the bureaucracy will not be ignored. The man said the fine was $150, but his whole demeanor indicated that charging me was not what he wanted to do. He said I just needed any proof that I had stayed at a hotel. Even a receipt would work. I used to have a receipt. I remembered holding on to the stub for weeks before deciding there was no point. I told him I would be back, then stepped outside to consider my options. Mark did not have the same problem as me. He knew the rules and had gotten the paperwork filled out in Novosibirsk. He showed me the simple signed note with his name. I had a note too, from the Russian army captain I'd drunk vodka with 3 days ago. I took both the notes and walked back inside. Laying the document on his desk, I hoped they crossed the low bar the man had set. I pointed to the note given to me by the drunk army captain, but I wasn't exactly sure what was said, and then to Mark's document. I lied and told the man I was with Mark at the time, but hadn't gotten my name on the paper. The border agent looked them over and nodded. That was enough for him. I watched as he checked the box on the paperwork before stamping me out of Russia. Parked at the gate were 2 ruggedized Land Cruisers on their way out of Mongolia. They had winches on the front bumpers, snorkeled air intakes for high water, and spare tires strapped to the roof. I spoke to a woman in the passenger seat who looked quite shaken. She didn't speak English, but we were able to communicate something about a flooded road. I asked what road they had taken and how a bicycle would fare, but I couldn't understand her answer. To see her so unnerved in such a capable vehicle made me worried that I had arrived unprepared. Mark and I pedaled a quiet 15 miles across the no man's land before arriving to a Mongolian guard shack atop a windswept hill. A few soldiers were kneeling on the ground, creating a decorative mosaic out of colorful stones scavenged from the area. I handed over my passport for a stamp, then stepped past the blue and red striped post, marking the border of Mongolia. My emotions were running high. I was excited to arrive, but more than anything, I was glad to be out of Russia. Crossing the plains had become excruciating by the end. When starting the journey, I did not expect that one of my greatest challenges would be the tedium of a straight road that stretches on for months. My mental stamina to perform such a feat is not well developed, and I feel that my psyche has been brought to a fragile edge. I learned that the fortitude necessary to do what is hard becomes multiplied when the thing is also dull. I feel as though just another day or two stuck in the monotony of the plains would have surely broken me. I'm so glad to be out of Russia. Finally. The road turned to dirt, and Mark and I stopped at the first dusty little town, just a dozen small buildings made from wood and mud. After wandering around for a few minutes, a young man approached us and asked if we needed to exchange money. He took us to his cafe, where he also lived. We sat at the only table and were served tea and pot stickers cooked by his mother. Mark exchanged money, then I tried as well, but the man didn't have enough cash. He took my $140 worth of rubles, then disappeared for a long time while he went around to his neighbors trying to get more Mongolian tukriks. I wasn't sure the ATM situation in Mongolia, so I brought enough money from Novosibirsk to get me to China. The man returned with all the cash in town, but he couldn't cover the whole exchange. The money he gave me will have to be enough. I'll just need to keep my budget to $3 per day. Mark and I carried on through a landscape of dry, treeless hills, grazing cows and domed yurts. I've never seen a yurt in person. They looked like white gumdrops sitting in the distant green meadows. This evening, the open landscape left nowhere to hide, so we set up camp on a hillside away from the road. Soon after, a father and his teenage son arrived on a dirt bike to say hello. The father was friendly and smiled the whole time. He asked me to get out my camera to take a picture with him and his son. I stood between them with my arms over their shoulders. The Mongolian welcome party. July 25th, 2013. Detour. After packing up camp, Mark and I bicycled into the next small town of a few dozen homes. We were looking for a cafe to eat breakfast, but after a short lapse through the village, we concluded there was none. This is where Mark and I parted. He was heading south, I needed to take the road north. We wished each other safe travels, then he pedaled off, and I was on my own again. As I was heading out of town the other direction, a young woman said hello to me. She only spoke a little English, but told me a river had flooded the road, and only large jeeps could get past. The road must be the same one that distressed the woman at the border yesterday. I would need to find a different route. I thanked the woman, then before I could go, she invited me into her humble wooden home for tea. Several children were in the house, as well as a few adults, and a grandmother. The woman who invited me in had 3 children. Her youngest, a tiny 1-year-old baby, had asthma. I could hear him wheezing while he drank from a bottle in his mother's arms. She told me that she feeds him horse milk to help his lungs. I nodded, and for the first time in my life, I thought about a horse being milked. Another little boy, perhaps 3 years old, repeated his one foreign word. Singing like a parrot, but struggling with the pronunciation, he said, "Kello, Kello." I sat with the adults. Biscuits and fried cheese were set on the table, and I was served a mug of warm, milky tea. The grandmother also told me about the high water. She lives on the other side of the river and said the mosquitoes are very bad right now. I got directions from her to go south to Olgi and loop back around to the north. She also said the people in that area are unfriendly and warned me to be careful. After an hour sitting with the family, we all got up to leave the house together. I was ready to keep going, and everyone else needed to check on their animals. The little boy brought me his coat, and I had a heartwarming moment helping him get his arms through the sleeves and rolling up the cuffs to free his hands. Taking the grandma's recommendation, I headed south into a slow climb on a packed dirt road. The valley stretched out straight ahead of me, rising up to the high pass on the horizon. I climbed for hours as the road became steeper and the surface looser, until I was forced to push the last 100 meters to the top. I might have rested there, but I could see the sky beginning to fill with afternoon thunderstorms. Bursts of rain, falling in long white streaks, drifted across the dry mountains and broad valley. The town of Olgi was at the bottom of the descent, and I felt urged onward to avoid getting wet. The pass was at 8,000 feet, and I dropped 2,500 feet on the way down. Starting from the top, the road was freshly paved, long and straight. I rolled without pedaling or turning for nearly an hour. There were no cars or people, and only the grassland and surrounding mountains. Moving along demanded so little of my attention that I became lulled to drowsiness by the slow-moving landscape and the white noise of wind across my ears. I nodded off for a moment, shorter than the time needed for me to lose my balance, but long enough to jolt back awake. I recentered the bike under me and kept going. Olgi is a town of 30,000 people spread out across a broad sandy valley. I had just reached the outskirts when a man and his teenage son waved me down from their car. He told me he had a guest house, so I followed him there. They showed me a single room with rugs covering the walls and floor, and there were 3 single beds. The mattress sagged as much as my hammock, but the room came with dinner, and the rain was starting to fall. I told him I would stay. When we began to negotiate the price, the man lowered himself into a crouch. I looked down at him wondering what he was doing, He beckoned me with a wave to join him, and I squatted down to have the conversation. The interaction made me think there aren't going to be many chairs in Mongolia. A group of Russians on a fishing trip arrived for the night in off-road vans. We ate dinner together, and I talked to one of the men who spoke English. He works with a volunteer group of Russian cardiologists that take trips to Mongolia to care for the people. He said that heart disease is a big problem because the Mongolian diet is almost completely animal-based. He gestured at our own dinner of greasy goat meat dumplings prepared by the mother of the house. Healthy or not, they were delicious, and I ate a large pile of them. Following dinner, I swapped my bike tires to a pair I've been carrying for the past 5 months, waiting just for this moment. They have thick, heavy-duty tread designed for dirt roads, and after 7,000 miles, my old tires were bald, full of cuts, and missing chunks of rubber. I felt a sense of accomplishment to have worn them out. This journey has given me the opportunity to indulge in my lifelong fascination of watching things change very slowly. At one of my earliest memories, I'm looking at the soles of my shoes to see how the rubber is wearing away, and I still do that. Out here, I'm delighted watching the colors bleach from my panniers, seeing my tire tread wear smooth, and having my clothes fall apart on my body. In this way, a very long journey suits me perfectly. July 26, 2013. My bike stand is gone. I left early this morning before anyone is awake to say goodbye. The road leaving town was packed dirt and loose gravel with sections of washboard. A white van taxiing people between towns stopped and several people piled out to stretch their legs and say hello. I asked the driver if the road gets any better than this. He spoke some English and said, "This is a good road. They only get worse." The van was the first of only 14 vehicles to pass me today, and nearly every one of them stopped to see what I was doing. I was glad to have the vast, quiet expanse all to myself, yet not feel alone, especially because I could never quite tell if I was lost. The roads were merely tracks across the open land. They were neither marked nor contained, and regularly split to shoot off in different directions. I have maps downloaded for this area, but the roads I followed were too primitive to be included. I navigated by following the most well-worn track that took me east. This worked fine until I came to 2 rutted tracks that had indistinguishable amounts of wear. I stopped there to take a closer look. The left path crossed the valley ahead before disappearing into the mountains on the far side. The right path followed the valley south farther than I could see. As I pondered my decision, a motorcycle came down the path on the left and parked. A young man wearing a black duster walked over and stood with me. He lit a cigarette, and together we looked at the dry hills and drifting clouds. I might have asked him which way to go, but there was nowhere specific I was trying to get to. Before leaving, he asked to use my camera, and stepped back to take a picture of me, a rare photo of myself from more than an arm's length away. I thanked him, and he got back on his motorcycle and drove off. I also got going, deciding to go left across the valley, the way the motorcycle had come. A white taxi van carrying a few Israelis and a French couple stopped to say hello and snapped a picture of me. I was 4 hours farther down the road when the same driver returned, but without any passengers. He pulled his van up next to me and stopped. He's eating a big chunk of horse meat off the end of a rib bone. Rolling down his window, he handed the rest of the rib to me. I thanked him, then he gave me a little wave and drove off. I looked out at the quiet landscape while I ate. Fist-sized clumps of dull green grass dotted the pale red ground for as far as I could see, each tuft growing a half pace from every other. As I chewed the meat, I realized that I was eating the grass around me, filtered through the life of a horse. When I finished, I placed the white rib gently upon the ground, returning the bone to the land. The road took me to the shore of a lake and to a short bridge across the outlet. 3 yurts stood at the funneling point. As I approached, a little boy, perhaps 5 years old, ran to me and started pushing on my bike. I swerved away and tried to stay ahead of him. At the yurts, 4 more young boys came outside, stopping my bike, followed by 3 men about my age. and a woman holding a baby covered in red spots, like chicken pox, or maybe a lot of mosquito bites. Trash was scattered about, and even without words, I picked up on a feeling of unwelcomeness. I stood straddling my bike as they circled me, staring silently, coldly. They all looked rough, with scabs, scars, and skin damage from a lifetime of sunburns. I could see an unhappy life etched into the lines on their faces. The adults said nothing, but one of the little boys in front of me punched his hand with his fist. His 40-pound frame was not intimidating, but I was bothered that he thought to make the gesture at all. I ignored their hostility and smiled back at them all, making a point to look at each of them in their glaring eyes. The alpha male held a nearly empty vodka bottle in his hand. After a tense minute, he gave me a small nod in the direction of the bridge. I pedaled away with the little boys chasing, pulling on my bike and trailer as they went. On the sandy road, I couldn't go fast enough to get away, and they stayed with me until they were breathless. I went another 150 meters before getting off to check that my bags were secure. The bags were fine, but the stand I used for my bike was missing from the side pocket, an aluminum pole that collapses into a convenient size while being sturdy enough to support my heavy bike. The stand has been particularly useful in Mongolia, where there is literally nothing to lean my bike against. I used the stand just 2 miles earlier, on the other side of the yurts, and I remember putting the disassembled pieces into my pocket, where I always put them. I thought one of the boys might have taken the stand while they were grabbing at my bags. The little boys restarted the chase when they saw me stop, and by the time they arrived, I had assessed the situation. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at me. I mimed taking something from my bag and looked disapprovingly at them. They all understood exactly what I meant. In an adorable way, they reached deep into their pockets of their ragged pants and pulled them inside out. One of the boys wore sweatpants with rips down the front of both legs. He lifted his threadbare shirt to his chin and spun around to show me he had nothing. I got out a bag of cookies and gave them all a handful. I didn't feel safe going back past those yurts. My stand had fallen overboard and was gone. In the middle of the day, I had a jarring fall. I was rolling down a hill at a running pace when a rut swept my front wheel from under me. I was down in an instant, hitting the ground with a thud. I bruised my palm and my knee banged on a rock hard enough for me to cry out. I got up and limped in a circle until I was feeling good enough to pedal. I'm still sore from the fall tonight. With less than an hour of daylight left, I pushed my bike away from the road to lay out my sleeping bag on a hillside with the most spectacular view. I admired a grand lake below. Reflecting off the surface was a sky of billowing clouds shining in the pink and orange fire of the setting sun. Where shafts of yellow sunlight pierced through, pillars of white rain turned into shining columns of molten gold. Beyond the lake, glaciers clung to cold and jagged peaks. I watched until dark, riveted by the colors and the play of light across the land. Every night, nature puts on a live performance, and this was one of the best shows I've ever seen. July 27th, 2013. Hard day. My stomach began to ache in the night, enough to wake me up. I had eaten a can of baked beans for dinner that must have gone bad. I got them from a small rural shop a couple of days ago. I purchased the cheapest food I can, even as the quality keeps getting worse. Maybe next time I'll splurge an extra 10 cents to not have to eat the worst food available. By morning, I was tired and still nauseous. I wanted to rest where I was, but I began to sweat as soon as the sun came up. I packed my things, then went only a mile on a bumpy road before I had to stop to throw up. I stuck my finger down my throat to get everything out, but there was nothing left. I needed to rest, so I looked around for a place to shelter from the sun. Nothing in sight grew any higher than my knee. I pushed my bike away from the dirt track to a single thin bush. There on the ground was a cow's skull, sitting upright, dried and bleached by the desert sun. The rest of the animal was gone, no flesh or bones in sight, except for a palm-sized patch of coarse black hair between the horns, like a toupee. I wondered if the animal had also been feeling sick when she lay down to rest and never got up. I joined the skull in the ground and stuck my head under the bush's sharp branches. There was only enough of a shadow to cover my face, so while I laid there, the rest of me baked in the sun. I slept for a time and woke up wet with sweat. My stomach was feeling a little better though, and I got up to carry on. The road was empty all day except for one man on a motorcycle who stopped to talk. He was about my age, a little shorter than I am, but stouter. I shook his thick hand and felt the strong grip. He didn't speak any English, so when he asked to see my passport, I didn't know what he meant. He got out his photo ID to show me, pointing at the card, then at me. I didn't want to show him my passport. I smiled, feigned confusion, then tried to change the subject. He tried again, holding his ID up to my face. I acted confused again. We did a few rounds of this. He was obviously going somewhere, but I had all day to stand there and play dumb. I hoped he would get impatient and leave. His frustration grew, but he wasn't leaving, and I relented before he became angry. I pulled the copy of my passport out of my bag and handed the document to him. He inspected the sheet for a minute, turning the paper over. Then with a miming action, he asked where my stamp was. I brought an imaginary camera to my face and took a photo, and pointed to my photocopied passport, trying to tell him he was looking at a picture, not the real thing. He got out his ID again and pointed to me. I pointed back at the photocopy. He asked again where the stamp was. I mimed the camera and pointed to the photocopy. I had gotten us into a loop that he didn't have the words to get out of. At this point, he changed his strategy and asked to look through my bags. I wasn't going to let him rifle through my stuff, but I felt okay showing him some of what I brought. I went to where my bike was lying on the ground and continued to try to bore him. I got out my food bag to show him my pasta, cookies, and bread, slowly explaining each item and how I ate them. He was patient enough to get through all the food. Next, I unpacked my sleeping bag. I held the bag up, showed him how the zipper worked, and spent long minutes struggling to compress everything back into its stuff sack. The guy must have thought I was an idiot. His patience ran out as I was showing him how I put on my raincoat. He gave me back the photocopy, said thank you in surprisingly clear English, then got back on his motorcycle and drove away. The experience left me feeling depleted. The strategy I've adopted on this journey is to play ignorant to bad intentions. I look right through them as if I can't pick up on social cues. This gives me a point of leverage as I understand the situation better than the other person realizes. I knew this man was up to something, but I refused to join him. He urged me to be a victim, while I urged him to be a friend. I think we parted on better terms than he would have liked. I continued into a quiet and empty landscape. The earth rippled with heat, and the sun was still high as I drank the last of my water. Ahead of me was a broad, flat expanse rimmed by dry hills. The moment felt archetypal for an adventure on the edge. My supplies were exhausted, and I was placing faith in my own body as a vehicle to salvation. I felt the gravity of my situation, and pushed on. I checked the nearby lake for a drink, the one that I could see from my camping spot last night. I detoured 2 miles from my path to get to the shore, but found only a muddy green muck so thick I wasn't able to access any water. The choice to go to the lake was a 1-hour detour that left me back where I started, and even thirstier than I was. An hour after that, I felt a sort of primal desperation. An hour more, and the matter consumed my thoughts entirely. My pace was excruciatingly slow due to my aching knee from yesterday's fall, the sandy road that regularly forced me to push, and my distressed stomach sapping my energy. By the late afternoon, my throat was too dry to swallow, and while the temperature was still 80 degrees, I was getting chills, which I knew was a bad sign. Finally, mercifully, I came across a 6-inch wide stream trickling across the flat land. Only an inch deep and flowing slowly, I feared the water would run dry at any moment. I got down on my hands and knees, lowering myself to drink off the ground like an animal. I felt so grateful. I drank until I was full, then I drank a little more. I stayed next to the stream, filtering the water until I had all that I could carry. 2 men found me camping this evening. I was a quarter mile from the road, and from the height of their horses, I was spotted lying behind thin bushes. They rode over at a trot, then dismounted to look at my bike and sleeping bag. They were friendly, but being discovered has left me feeling vulnerable. Hopefully, no one will be coming back tonight. Today, I experienced feelings of desperation the likes of which I have never known. I fought to take myself forward for 14 hours and covered only 23 miles. I can literally see the spot on the hill where I slept last night. I've never been anywhere like Mongolia. The shift in culture, infrastructure, and climate has been so abrupt that I feel caught unprepared. I'm disheartened by the thought that every day will be this hard. July 28, 2013. Much better day. Early this morning, I biked into a small town of yurts to get supplies. People were only just waking up, and no one was outside. I went up and down the few dirt streets looking for a market. A dog started following me, then another, big mongrel guard dogs. They kept their distance, but started yipping, which drew the attention of more dogs. By the end of the next street, 6 of them were on my tail, working themselves into a fervor. I picked up my pace as I started moving in, then took off at a sprint as the first one bit my trailer. My heavy bike slammed over the rutted and rocky ground. I knew there was no way I would be able to outrun them. I pointed towards the edge of town, and just beyond the last yurt, I looked back to see the dogs begin to fight among themselves, barking viciously and jumping at each other. In their moment of distraction, I got far enough away that they lost interest. All 6 dogs trotted back home. My adrenaline was still pumping hard, and I charged up the long hill out of town. A Russian man on a touring motorcycle, coming from the other direction, stopped to talk to me. He had been in Mongolia for a few weeks and was on his way back home. In a few hours, he expected to be at the border, where I was 3 days ago. The man spoke English well, and as we chatted, he had the divine intuition to offer me his map. The exact thing I needed. He handed me photocopies that covered all of Mongolia and kept only the page that would take him to the border. The map even had enough detail to show the track we were on right then. On my digital map, the closest road was 20 miles away. I felt a wave of relief to know where I was again. I reached the top of the hill at the same time as a van full of Mongolian college students from Ulaanbaatar. They were out on a week-long field trip and gave me a Mongolian beer that I packed away for later. One of them spoke English and pointed out a 6-foot-wide ring of stones circling a large central pile. She explained that we are looking at the 1,000-year-old grave of an ice queen, but she didn't say what an ice queen was. Other ring graves had knee-high stone figures for headstones. The carvings were rudimentary, and the details had weathered away long ago. As I was going down the hill, I met a Chinese cyclotourist pushing his bike up. He's from Beijing and started his trip 18 days ago in Ulaanbaatar. I felt greatly relieved to hear this. After yesterday, I thought I would need a month to get that far. The other guy had more immediate concerns. He had been pushing uphill for an hour and wondered when he would reach the top. I told him he'd be pushing for 2 more hours at least. As encouragement, I said there would be a pile of rocks to look at when he got there. The way down from the pass was very steep and covered with loose gravel. I crept along at a walking pace, though my brakes were barely up to the task of slowing me. I squeezed them so hard and for so long that my hands cramped from exhaustion, and several times I had to pause to let them rest. I knew that if I lost control of my speed, even for a moment, wrecking would be the only way to stop. I hadn't yet reached the bottom of the hill when a pickup truck stopped with 3 men in the cab. The driver was a large Mongolian man who spoke English well. He was a mining engineer and had earned a degree at the University of Idaho. He handed me a bottle of water, and we talked while I drank. The 2 other men in the truck were ridiculously drunk. The man in the middle was poking the engineer's belly. He tried ignoring him and slapped his hand away. The drunk guys were giggling, and the engineer was trying not to laugh. The guy was being pretty funny. I asked the engineer who they were, and he said they were his co-workers. In the late afternoon, I followed a narrow road up a gnarled low mountain. The top was mostly flat, and a couple on touring motorcycles caught me there, John and Anna from Romania. They were fluent in English, and while we were chatting, other people started to arrive. The first to stop were 3 Mongolian men on motorcycles. They were in a warm mood. One of them had a plastic bottle with clear liquid that he offered to us. I held the drink to my nose and smelled the alcohol. Teasing him, I asked if it was a bottle of water. He laughed and said, "Water is like drinking poison." Another car arrived with 5 people, and some of them had been drinking too. A minute later, 3 more men pulled up in a small car, and suddenly, a party had coalesced. At the urging of his friend, one of the men performed a folk song using the deep, reverberating technique of Mongolian throat singing. Everyone was jolly and having a fun moment together. Then, after 10 minutes, the whole group dispersed. I agreed to meet John and Anna 10 kilometers farther down the road. I told them to pick a spot, then look for me in an hour. Along the way, a Land Cruiser passed me as I slowly climbed a hill. The SUV stopped 50 meters ahead of me, and I watched 21 people climb out of the 5-seat vehicle. They gathered along the edge of the road to watch as I slowly struggled past them. A few people cheered me on. They all looked happy to be stretching their legs. When they drove past me a second time, I saw that they were sitting 4 high on each other's laps. Shortly after, I met a delightful husband and wife driving home. The wife gestured to somewhere over the hill. They gave me a bottle of hydration drink. I was out of water, so I was happy for the fluids. I quickly finished the bottle, which prompted them to go into their trucks to get me a cucumber and a chunk of lunch meat. I thanked them, then they went back to their truck one final time for a bottle of vodka. They only had 2 glasses, so I drank a shot with each of them. When they offered me more, I held my hands up. I got them laughing when I mimed that I would fall off my bike. I found John and Anna getting their tent set up next to a group of 3 yurts. They had needed water too, and when they stopped to ask for some, the grandmother invited them to stay. This place is beautiful. There is a wide open view of the grass-covered hills and the big sky above. Rainbows dance beneath clouds throughout the evening. Now, the stars are coming out, and goats are murmuring in the darkness. A big scruffy dog is running into the night, barking with excitement. Most nights I'm alone, so seeing the guard dog working so hard makes me wonder if there are things out there I need to be worried about. July 29th, 2013. Down the mountain. A cow woke me up just as the sun was rising. She bumped me with her nose and wandered away. Children with sleepy eyes were coming out of the yurts to herd the animals toward uneaten pastures. Thin clouds in the sky glowed with warm colors. The grandmother invited John, Anna, and I into the yurt for breakfast. The inside was warm and homey. Colorful rugs covered the ground, and vibrant details were painted onto the yurt's wooden frame. A little boy slept on the floor beneath strips of meat drying on the wall. Small blocks of homemade cheese, the size of butter sticks, hung from lines of strings that crossed the ceiling. In the middle of the yurt sat a small stove heating a steaming black cauldron. A box of cow dung sat on the floor, and I watched the grandmother use her bare hands to move a few chips of feces into the stove, then go straight on to picking up biscuits and cheese and placing them on a plate for us to eat. I picked up a biscuit and tried to think of the last time I washed my own hands. We were also served fresh yogurt that was quite good, and from the cauldron we were given a cup of clear liquid. The drink was distilled from horse milk and tasted slightly alcoholic. The flavor was mild, like coconut water with a splash of vodka. After breakfast, I said goodbye to Anna and John. They were heading to the far eastern edges of Russia, where the road will eventually end, and then they'll turn around. We left together, but they were quickly out of sight, and I was alone again. I crossed another wide valley, and at the pass on the far side, I came to a large cairn, or uvu, as the marker is called in Mongolia. The base was a 10-meter wide pile of boulders, as large as a man could lift, and their collective bulk supported a 10-foot tall wooden pole sticking straight out of the middle. The pole was draped and wrapped with wide silken ribbons, the color of deep blue sky. I've seen a couple of these uvus, and I'm struck by how beautifully they fit into their surroundings. I believe they look so natural because, unlike a built object, they grow organically. Their seeds germinate on mountaintops and high passes, and very slowly, across centuries even, they become larger and more ornate. By gathering material up to a short walk away, the uvus grow from the stone where they live. Their form is achieved without guidance, helped along by many hands over many generations. Each uvu is a little different, and they are all magnificent. Frequently, drivers will stop at an uvu to take a break. All the passengers get out to walk a slow circle around the stone shrine, a ritual to bring safe travels. I haven't taken up the practice myself. I need to believe that my luck is innate, because I will still be going when the uvus are far behind me. I rolled over the pass into a 3,000-foot descent that deposited me onto a wide, flat expanse. At the bottom of the hill, I spent a few minutes with 4 high school-age boys waiting for their friends at the intersection. The pavement started there, so we tried chatting while I took the time to pump up my tires. I learned that they were going into the mountains for a camping trip, but we struggled to communicate much more than that. They had a bottle of juice in a single cup that was filled for each of us, then passed around. The first guy drank the cup of juice, then threw the last few drops into the air. I thought he was performing some custom such that after I finished the cup he poured me, I also threw the last few drops into the air and added the exclamation, "Mongolia," as a toast to the country. The 4 of them looked at me bemused, but said nothing. I handed the cup back, feeling a little embarrassed. After the next guy finished, he did nothing with the last few drops, and neither did the other 2 guys. I think they were worried for me. Before I left, they gave me bread and a can of fish. Across the wide open land, I could see the weather starting to take a turn. As the first drops fell, I stopped to take shelter under a bridge. The storm would not actually hit me for another 45 minutes, but I knew the bridge would be the only cover for miles around. A local couple on a motorcycle joined me as the rain started coming down hard. The hills to the south turned white from hail, and the stream, which was nearly dry when I arrived, swelled as a shallow flash flood swept across the sandy land. I sat with the couple as we waited for the rain to pass. This evening, the road began to run parallel to a row of high-voltage power line towers, each with 4 legs perfectly spaced to hang my hammock. The sky was filled with lingering gray clouds, and the flash flood was on my mind. I wasn't keen to sleep on the ground and biked over to the tower. I considered the deadly amount of electricity running through the high-voltage lines above me, then hung my hammock. The electricity up there shouldn't affect me down here. I feel good being back in my hammock. From where I'm lying, I can see 60 miles to a solitary stripe of rainbow shining over the mountains like a beacon. July 30th, 2013. Migrant workers. A few miles from where I camped, I biked into the relatively large town of Olengam, consisting mostly of square, fenced-in lots with round yurts inside. I went to a small market to buy bread and jam and was surprised to find a freezer with ice cream. It had one option, an ice cream bar on a stick made from goat's milk. The flavor wasn't nearly as sweet as I expected, more like a cheese than an ice cream. I didn't mind. The day was hot and I was glad to find something cold to eat. As I was leaving the store, a man pulled me back inside. He wanted me to buy him vodka. Instead, I brought him to my bike and pulled out the beer given to me 2 days ago at the Ice Queen's grave. He seemed happy enough with the compromise. Throughout the afternoon, I followed the construction of a highway across the empty land. The heavy equipment had all moved elsewhere and left behind a finished roadbed without pavement on top. The hard-packed dirt was still a good surface to ride on, but occasionally there were 8-foot-tall piles of gravel poured across the road to prevent people from driving on the unfinished surface. Whenever these piles forced me off, I simply pulled back onto the road that was there before. The coming highway will be quite the upgrade, as the original road was nothing more than a single set of tire ruts. I watched storms building in the afternoon, then bursts of rain began to fall around me. Hoping to find shelter, I pulled into a road worker's encampment of 3 canvas shelters with a small garden in front. A tall Asian man walked out of the middle tent to greet me. I pointed to the dark clouds, and he immediately invited me inside. I entered the home of 5 Chinese laborers resting on their day off. The whole width of the room, and most of the depth, was filled by a sleeping platform of their narrow bed frames lined up next to each other without any gaps. They didn't use mattresses, only a few layers of blankets over plywood. The floor was dirt and littered with cigarette butts. When I walked in, they were all lounging and looking bored, but brightened up to have a guest. They're all about my age, or a little younger, and each of them came from a different place in China. For 6 months a year, they lived at the work site, operating the heavy equipment 6 days per week. They said the road they are building is a 10-year project that they are 4 years into. The mother of one of the men also lived there. She stayed in the next tent over with the kitchen and did all the cooking. While I was there, she served us a large boiled fish. The wide eyes stared disapprovingly as we pulled meat from the bones. The rain came and went, then the guys took me into the surrounding pasture to look for mushrooms sprouting from the wet earth. I paused in the field to take in the moment. Mushroom hunting in Mongolia with Chinese construction workers. How wonderful. I was invited to stay for the night. Dinner is going to be the dozen mushrooms we found, along with greens from the little garden. They even offered me a spot on the sleeping platform. I thanked them, but declined. They were already sharing a space that left little more than their shoulder width for sleeping. I wanted to sleep out in the open, and besides, the rain had cleared, leaving a perfect evening for a bike ride. I pedaled a couple more hours before setting up camp behind a small rise that hides me from the road. I cooked a pot of rice, then sat on the ground to admire the view. Pale, sun-bleached grass stretched out in front of me for many miles. Rolling mountains filled the far-off horizon. Countless nuances of blue filled in the sky, and splashes of rainbow shone with the light of the setting sun. Rising miles above the whole magnificent scene were massive, white plumes of clouds shooting upward as if they were pillars holding up the heavens. I watched as the colors of the sunset slowly climbed those grand white canvases, followed by the shadow of the earth, then the darkness of the night. July 31st, 2013, a giant lake. I stopped at a store in a little town this morning and drew a crowd of men who were deeply interested in my bike, as if they had not seen one before. They pulled the brake levers, played with the shifters, and wiggled the trailer. Every one of them squeezed the tires. One of them urged me to buy him a drink, so I went back into the store and purchased a can of beer. He complained to the group, only half jokingly, that he had wanted vodka. After opening the can, he gave the beer to me to have the first drink. He then passed the beer around to everyone there before finishing off what was left. I bicycled into a drier climate. The grass grows more sparsely, and the herds of cows have been replaced by camels. The temperature climbed to 90 degrees today, and the land baked. I could feel the heat radiating off the ground as much as down from the sun. Even when I came upon a large lake, there was no oasis. In fact, nothing was growing. All around, the landscape was desolate and quiet. I followed the shore of the lake for 30 miles, pedaling slowly along sandy tire tracks, hoping to find anywhere to rest. The complete lack of shade was hard to accept. From hilltops, I could see dozens of miles in every direction, and the longest shadow in sight was cast by me. The only shade I found all day was from a single small tourist shop along the shore of the lake. The sun was high, and the shadow of the building was hardly wider than my shoulders, but that was enough. I laid on the ground against the wall and tried to cool off. I slept for an hour, waiting for the heat to pass, but when I woke up, I was still sweating. Half a dozen people were wandering around. I must have looked rather desperate as I lay there in my ragged shirt, passed out in a sliver of shadow. I was glad simply to have a place to be still. Without shade, I barely take breaks. The only thing to sit on is the hot earth, and there's nothing even to lean against. When I rest, I simply lay my bike over, then stand in the stifling heat as the sun beats down. I'm not comfortable enough to stay, so after a few minutes, I go back to pedaling. I'm getting a sense of the Mongolian roads, and I like how unrestrained they are. Any intrepid soul can start a new path to take them wherever they want to go. In this wide open land, there's nothing to get in the way. The most used routes wear over time until they become deep ruts, at which point an adjacent track is created just a couple paces over. In one high-traffic area, I saw this method create an 8-lane dirt highway with perhaps 80 more tire ruts on the side that were weathering back to neutral. As evening arrived, I laid my sleeping bag out on the ground at a beautiful spot overlooking the lake. I walked to the water's edge with my empty bottles, but discovered that the water was salty. That's why nothing grows here. I was counting on the water to get me through till tomorrow. I'm already thirsty, and only have one mouthful saved for morning. The last flowing stream I crossed was 85 miles ago. I'll be in trouble if I need to go that far again. This evening, I watched a silent lightning storm flash over the far shore of the lake. Then a slow sunset painted the sky in vivid colors. I'm now looking up at the Milky Way, spilling across the heavens. The starlight is bright enough to see my shadow. The air is still, and the world is silent. There are no bugs, no cars, no homes. I am alone, and I am at peace. August 1st, 2013. Long bumpy day. I woke up thirsty and looked out at the salty lake. A haze had settled in the night, muting the colors. The day was hot as soon as the sun came up, and I'd started biking shortly after. With my water bottles empty and feeling rather parched, I searched for any little stream to drink from. As the temperature climbed, I began to feel desperate, but I knew the only way out of the torrid situation was somewhere ahead of me. Using my tattered sleeve, I wiped sweat from my eyes and focused on moving forward. I followed the shore for another 20 miles until midday when I finally left the water behind to continue into the dry landscape. A single yurt appeared on a hill, and standing outside was a Mongolian man and his motorcycle. He waved for me to join him, and when I got there, we went inside. He was traveling to Ulaanbaatar, still 600 miles east of here, and I came to realize he didn't actually know the woman and young girl inside. Like me, he was just a traveler, looking for a place to rest. We happened to arrive at the same time. Hosting a passing traveler seems to be customary in Mongolia. Everyone understands the harshness of this land and the need to help each other. The woman served us biscuits and hard cheese, the same as I had in the other Mongolian homes. Most importantly, she filled my empty water bottles, scooping clean water from a plastic 55-gallon barrel. As we sat in the yurt, I gave the man my camera to scroll through the photos while I tried to explain what he was looking at. He kept joking about the pictures and had the woman laughing, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. After a half hour, we stepped back out into the sun together. I thanked the woman for the water and asked the man how far to the next river. He wrote in the dirt that I would cross one in 170 kilometers. Hearing this made me feel particularly glad that he invited me inside. To maintain the purity and challenge of a self-sufficient expedition, I've taken to accepting help, but I never ask for help. That yurt was the last outpost of the day, and I didn't come across any more water. If the man had arrived just a minute sooner, he would have been inside when I got there. 1 minute later, and I would have been too far past the yurt to see him. If the timing hadn't been perfect for him to invite me in, I surely would have continued deeper into the desert, hoping for a stream instead of asking for a drink. I didn't realize at the moment, but he might have saved my life. The road today was jarring washboard, gravel, and dust, along with many sandy patches that simply couldn't hold me. My front wheel would sink into the ground, dragging me to a stop. I had to get off then wrestle my heavy gear across these sections. According to my bike computer, I was moving 9 hours to cross 50 miles, and every bit was a challenge. My legs were exhausted. Today was one of the most physically demanding days of my entire life, but here in Mongolia, this has become my routine. Tonight, I'm sleeping on the ground. The soil is dry and fine. Clumps of thin golden grass shine in the starlight, and I'm surrounded by the sound of delicate thudding. I couldn't figure out what I was hearing until I was hit in the face by a falling beetle. Hundreds of them were in the air around me, apparently struggling to fly. August 2nd, 2013. Runner. This morning I met Brian, a child's pastor from Wyoming, attempting to run across Mongolia. He was in a Land Cruiser with his Mongolian support crew driving to the day's starting point. He told me to keep going, then in the evening he would be back to pick me up, and we could all go to his camp for dinner. Biking the rest of the day was okay. There were a lot of mosquitoes despite the seemingly dry landscape. The rough sandy roads forced me to pedal slowly. My dawdling pace has been good for my knee these past few days, which after a week of aching is finally feeling better. Though after so many long days on bouncing roads, my sit bones are now suffering. Around midday, I discovered a shallow creek, which was just what I needed. I stripped naked in the hot sunshine and squatted in the ankle-deep water to rinse the salt from my body. 24 horses were there as well, watching me as I splashed in the river. While water was available, I refilled my bottles and rinsed my socks as well. The water that I carry is such a scarce resource that I never spare a single drop to wash myself, my clothes, or even my cooking pot. Being strict about this is easy, especially here in the desert, where my survival might depend on my caution. After 8 hours of biking, Brian caught up to me in the Land Cruiser. We strapped my bike to the roof, and I climbed into the back. The driver immediately abandoned the well-worn track, going fast across the open land towards a low gap in the mountains. He slammed on his brakes whenever a boulder or ditch appeared in front of him. To stabilize myself, I held onto the seat in front of me with both hands. At the pass, we slowed for a narrow rocky trail. A boulder at the top was painted with white Tibetan lettering. The driver told me a prayer was written, but that he can't read Tibetan to tell me exactly which one. We arrived at the camp on the side of a gently sloping hill, and I noticed right away there would be no flat ground to sleep on. Such is where my thoughts go. This place is beautiful though, away from the mosquitoes and with the spring nearby. The magnificent view looks far into the gently rolling mountains. Waiting at the camp were Brian's wife, 2 young children, and a Mongolian lady who cooks for them. We sat for a delicious meal of noodles and soup. I felt so civilized, seated on a chair at a table and eating off a clean plate. My normal is to sit on the ground and eat out of my dirty cooking pot. Having company for a meal also felt like a rare treat. While we ate, Brian explained that he runs about 20 miles per day, each morning getting a ride to where he ended the previous day. The camp leapfrogs his running once or twice a week. The downside of this method is all the driving. You will pass some places 12 times in a car in order to run past them just once. Brian told me he was inspired to visit Mongolia by the British television show Long Way Around, a documentary following the actor Ewan McGregor and 3 others as they ride motorcycles across Europe, Asia, and North America. Before I started my own journey, I watched the first episode, but no more. The amount of preparation they were doing was making me think I was severely underestimating what my own planning should be. They hired a logistics team to decide their route, and then invited a doctor to come along if anyone got hurt. By comparison, I overlooked bringing a map from Mongolia, and I've never even taken a first aid class. This show has been brought up to me several times across Eastern Europe and Russia. After telling non-English speakers that I'm from the United States, I see them try to think of anything that might be able to bridge our languages. Very typically, they'll say one of 4 things: New York, California, long way round with Ian McGregor, said just like that, always including with Ian McGregor. who is Scottish, and most common of all when someone learns that I'm American, they say Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is originally from Austria, but also, arguably, represents the American dream better than anyone else. After dinner, Brian's family retreated to their tents, while he and I stayed up to watch the stars come out and discuss the nature of adventure, a subject we are so immersed in that we could talk of nothing else. I think we were both glad to have someone who understood. August 3rd, 2013. Leaving camp. I sat with Brian this morning to gorge on leftover noodles and fresh bread. The camp was an island of refuge for me. I was living in luxury. I had friends who spoke my language, a flowing spring, a cook, and even a chair to sit on. I felt a wonderful sense of abundance as I ate and drank without fear of running out. A big part of me wanted to stay another day and keep eating their food, but I can't get anywhere if I don't go anywhere. From deep within, I needed to stay on the move. Brian and his family did send me off with a supply of noodles and 2 large ornate cookies that were a gift from the local mayor. I thanked them for lifting my spirits and filling my belly, then left them behind as I rolled downhill. Brian sent me an email some months later after he completed his run. Glad we could give you a boost. In a way, your visit had the opposite effect on me. For weeks I had been out on those roads running alone. Even though I had a large support team, I felt all alone. No one could really understand how hard it is out there. When you stayed with us, I felt like you understood what I was going through, and that made us brothers. Brothers of toil, misery, heat, pain, freedom, and great joy. The morning you rode out of camp, I jogged along the ridgetops, following your progress. As you rode out of sight down the valley, I sat down and cried. Not sure why. Because there were so few cars on that road, dusty sand trap, I could follow your tracks for about 2 days. By the time we got into Ulaanbaatar, we figured you were already riding out of Mongolia. Your time with me in camp that night was bittersweet. For a brief moment, I had someone that could really understand what I was going through, and that was so encouraging. But your departure left me wishing we could have spent more time together. Oh well, next time. At the bottom of the hill, I arrived in a town of a few hundred people. There was a grid of dirt roads, and the homes were all single-room log cabins with tin roofs. I found a street lined with shops hardly larger than the person sitting in them. I went into all 9 of the stores looking for a few days' worth of food, but there was little more than a sparse selection of candy, and only one of them even had bread. I was astonished that the residents were living off only the food available in those shops. I asked about a proper grocery store, but there seemed to be none. The town didn't have water either, though they expected a tanker to arrive in the afternoon. With nothing more to see, I bought 3 loaves of bread and followed a well-worn track heading east. I had a tough day once I left town. I felt my resolve fractured by the comforts of Brian's camp. One night with a modicum of ease had given me enough perspective to see how hard my journey truly is. As I crossed the hot, dry land, I fixated on the challenge of what I'm doing. My motivation waned, and I struggled to carry on. The landscape I biked through has become greener compared to the last 2 days. The bulbous hills are now topped by evergreen forests, and grass is covering the ground. There were more animals too. Herds of sheep and goats grazed on the open land, and for the first time, I saw yaks. 2 of them stood on the road ahead of me, large hulking beasts with thick fur hanging nearly to the ground. The hair on their heads had been given a bowl cut, and wispy feathered bangs hanging down to their eyes made for a bold fashion statement. They were obviously the trendsetters of the steppe, and pulled off an interesting mix of intimidation and style. They were large enough to make me nervous, and I waited for them to move away before I passed. My dinner tonight was a failure. I tried to make pasta, but because I was hungry, I put in too many noodles, and because I was afraid of running out, not enough water. The noodles dissolved into a sticky, starchy mess. I don't have food to spare right now, so I simply added sauce and ate the pot of goo. Now the sky is dark, and a herd of 30 horses is running laps around me. They go charging across the land as a group, and I'm worried that I'll be trampled in the dark. I'm laying down next to my bike in an attempt to look big enough to avoid, but I, and all my worldly possessions, creates only a very small pile in an otherwise vast and empty plain. August 4th, 2013. Stone Soup. In the late morning, I was caught by two Mongolian men in their 20s, riding together on a motorcycle. They asked if I wanted to eat lunch with them. I laid my bike over right there, and we sat on the ground together. They had a small plastic container of diced meat and a golf ball-sized onion. Through gestures, I realized they needed my stove, and as I got my stove out, they asked for my pot too. Then they borrowed my knife to cut the onion. They were making soup, and since they had no water, we used most of what I had left. Finally, they pointed out that the pot was not yet full. I added a package of thin white pasta to the mix that dissolved and turned the whole thing to the consistency of thick snot. I filled their bowls and took the rest. The taste started off okay, but the more I ate, the less appealing the flavor became. What I thought was cube meat turned out to be chunks of fat, sinew, and gristle. The fat was sticky and coated my mouth, while the rest was so tough I had to swallow the pieces whole. Eventually, the flavor became so strong that I couldn't eat anymore. I didn't want to dump out my pot in front of them, so I put the lid on and packed everything into my bag to empty later. The two guys live in the area and were out for a few days sightseeing. Both were sharply dressed in jeans and black leather jackets. They had no water with them, but they did have shoe polish. Each of them took a turn buffing their already shining boots. I looked around at the most remote place I've ever been, and these guys were shining their shoes. I got the sense they were going around trying to meet girls. I imagine there isn't much of a dating scene out here. After struggling to find motivation yesterday, I was glad to be back to myself today. Nothing could dampen my high spirits, and I felt content to slowly plod along under the hot sun. I've ridden my bicycle for 5.5 months to be here. I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do. Once I remembered, I could only be happy. At the end of the day, I pushed my bike to the top of a gentle hill to lay my sleeping bag in the grass for the night. I have a view of a lake and a mountain in the distance. The sky has turned orange, and narrow shafts of rain are drifting across the land. My body is tired in a way that feels good. I'm going to sleep well tonight. August 5th, 2013. Horses and a pretty sunset. Throughout the day, I saw horses grazing under drifting clouds. They would come to me from far away, approaching shoulder to shoulder in a unified front, curious and cautious. Perhaps I was the first person on a bicycle they had ever seen. When I pedaled past large herds, a captive audience of more than 50 horses would watch me go by. My knowledge of horses is entirely gleaned from media consumption. When several dozen of them ran across the road ahead of me, for the first time in my life, I heard the real sound of thundering hooves. But what the movies never portrayed is how much the horses are farting. The flatulent chorus was as loud and consistent as the pounding hooves. All the large animals living out here make me uncomfortable. The horses are aggressive. I've seen them bite chunks of fur out of each other and try to land violent kicks. The cows seem docile enough, but they have large, sharp horns that remind me to keep my distance. I don't trust the yaks because I don't know a single thing about them. Same with the camels. Even the goats are intimidating. The biggest ones are healthy, strong animals with thick, curling horns. I will not stand up well to a headbutt. The humble sheep is the only animal I trust. Their domestication is so thorough that I struggle to even imagine one being aggressive. I biked on dirt streets through the outskirts of Tausentis Sengel. a town of about 9,000 people. Folks were out walking, and kids were playing basketball. 3 times people stopped me to see my bike, and small crowds gathered to ask questions. The community seemed pleasant, but the weathered look of the wooden homes indicated this area is a harsh place to live. The summers are hot, close to 90 degrees today, and the winters are painfully cold. For 3 months a year, the average temperature is minus 30 degrees, and the people regularly have issues with fast winds burying their animals in snowdrifts. I bought more food while I was in town, then left on a sandy road that forced me to push for the last hour of the day. A week ago, that much sand would have been terribly frustrating, but at this point, biking 9 hours a day at a crawling pace has become normal. I have embraced the challenges of Mongolia and resigned myself to overcome them. Tonight, I'm camping on a hill overlooking the Eider River, which meanders down a broad valley between gently sloping mountains. Low, flat clouds captured the evening light magnificently. A crescendo of orange and red brightened and changed in every moment, culminating in a vibrant climax of color before slowly fading like a cooling ember. As darkness engulfed me, I laid on the ground to watch the stars come out. I've seen a dozen bright meteors burn across the sky, some with long glittering tails that lingered for a breath before fading into the night. August 6, 2013, biking a river valley. I followed a flowing river through a wide, gentle valley with large trees scattered along the banks and clinging to hilltops. Small groups of white yurts were scattered with miles between them. Cloud shadows speckled the rolling landscape. The sandy washboard road limited my pace to that of a slow jog, and I bicycled a relatively short 36 miles before stopping a few hours before sunset. I needed to rest. The long days and jarring roads have beaten me up. The knee I fell on a week ago has begun to ache again. My right Achilles tendon has been sore for days. The delicate balance of this journey is to maintain a pace that is not so fast that I injure myself, and not so slow that I lose hope of ever arriving. My camp is set up along a thin stream with my sleeping bag laying between cow patties. As evening approached, I tuned my bike, played guitar, and watched the clouds drift by. A young girl and her father found me as they were herding yaks back towards their yurt. Both of them were riding brown horses with cropped manes and short legs. All the people here ride short horses. Mongolians are generally short, and this makes the horses easier to climb onto. That's my theory, at least. The two of them dismounted to say hello, and the father's horse relieved himself right next to my things. I thought to be offended, but there was already a lot of manure all around me. They were guests in my home, so I gave them a tour. I showed them where I park my bike and where I sleep on the ground. I pointed to the kitchen where my stove sat, then gestured outward with my arms to indicate the rest of the world was my living room. The father asked to try my bike, and I let him go for a spin. He sat on the top tube to reach the pedals and did a short loop through the grass. When he returned, jokingly, I pointed to his horse to ask if I could try. He laughed and firmly said no. The girl is about 12 years old. She's barefoot and wore a purple sweater that said in English, "You rock my world." I played her a song on guitar while her father rode my bicycle. Before I finished, her face made clear that she was not impressed. She asked me to play something else, something better. I tried a different tactic and gave her the bracelet of black stones gifted to me 3 weeks ago in Russia. She smiled and put the elastic band on her wrist. Tonight, the sky is beautiful and clear. I can see a bright satellite racing north. A group of horses is nearby, a dozen of them, running around in the dark and farting. I'm tucked in against my bike, once again hoping that I don't get trampled. August 7th, 2013, lightning storm. I continued up a long valley this morning, climbing through a thin forest and over a pass at 7,700 feet. Near the high point, I came upon a small rivulet, and in a rare moment, I was inspired to rinse my shirt. The last time I cleaned my clothes was a month ago in Novosibirsk, and since then, there have been a lot of sweaty days, and many nights sleeping on the ground. I removed the shirt delicately to keep the holes from tearing any larger. Squeezing the submerged fabric, I watched the clouds of filth drift away. After 10 minutes, dirt was still coming out, but my hands had grown numb in the icy water. I put the shirt on wet to let the fabric dry on my back. Late in the afternoon, I stopped in the town of Agaldai to buy food. Tall red fences were built around humble wooden homes, and a rainbow of tin roofs added a nice touch of color around town. All the grocery stores were lined up on one street. Each of them were the size of a garden shed, and they were so sparsely stocked that they only had shelves on 2 walls. I had to visit 4 stores to get everything I wanted. Rice in one, dried apricots and peanuts in another, bread in a third, and jam in the fourth. Enough food for another 5 days. As I did my shopping, people gathered around to see my bike and squeeze the tires. I tried to answer their questions, and as we became friendlier, one of the men began to tease me about my nose. My nose doesn't stand out in the United States, but here in rural Asia, I have the sharpest nose around. I turned left and right to show off to everyone, and we were all laughing. My nose has actually been a regular topic of conversation since arriving in Mongolia. I left town into the next broad valley, and soon after, I noticed a rain cloud chasing me. I pedaled hard to get away, but the washboard road surface simply wouldn't let me get my speed up. The approaching rumble of lightning made clear that I was losing the race. Looking over my shoulder, I saw a wall of falling water rippling in the wind. When the storm caught me, I had to figure out what to do. I knew that lightning strikes the tallest object, and looking around, I found myself in a wide flat expanse between mountains, completely empty, except for me. Even lying down, I would have been taller than every boulder and blade of grass for a mile in every direction. A vague memory popped into my head of a lightning advisory from a trail I hiked years ago. The sign had a sketch of a lightning bolt and a person squatting down as low as they could, holding their shins while balancing on their toes. My recollection was so fuzzy that I questioned if I made up the memory, but that was the best I had. I laid my bike over, then walked some distance away to squat in the grass. For 40 minutes, I stayed in that position as lightning cracked overhead in rapid succession. The rain came down so hard that water splashing off the ground sprayed my face. My thighs burned, but I didn't dare sit or stand. I simply crouched there, frightened and exhausted. The situation was bad enough to merit deference. I brought my full awareness to the moment, to feel the rain pounding on my shoulders, the roaring sound against my hood, the water's sweet taste, the color of the wet soil. I wanted to be fully present for the moment I was smitten from this earth. Once the lightning passed, I felt really quite happy to not have been killed. I pedaled along joyfully for another hour until my rain gear dried, and I set up my bivvy for the night as another storm approached. The setting sun dropped below the clouds and illuminated the falling rain in an eerie orange glow. The storm I saw earlier is now upon me. I'm zipped up in my bivvy, which is struggling to be a fully waterproof shell. The wind is driving so hard that I can feel the impact of raindrops through my down sleeping bag. Or maybe I'm feeling hail. I can't see anything to know for sure. The night is pitch black and I'm inside of a bag. Not ideal, but unless the wind lifts me off the ground, out here in the open, there's nothing that could possibly harm me. I'm in the center of a raging storm and feel completely at ease. August 8th, 2013. Polish friends. My bivvy only partially prevented the rain and condensation from seeping into my sleeping bag last night. I was cold when I woke up, but the heat of the day arrived with the rising sun, and my gear was dry even before I finished breakfast. I hadn't gone far when I met a Polish couple in their 30s, biking down the road in the same direction I was heading. They spoke English and told me they are on a 6-week tour exploring the back roads of Mongolia. They came from the north, where they went 2 days without seeing anyone at all. Today, they got on the main road that I've been following. Calling the quiet dirt track a main road felt like a stretch, but they were eager to get back to somewhere without any people at all. While we stood in the road chatting, 2 more cyclists arrived from the other direction. A British couple in their 40s, just a week into their tour from Ulaanbaatar to Thailand. They asked me about the hills ahead, and when I described the mountain they'll be climbing today, a dreary expression fell across their faces. I wondered what they were expecting. The world is covered in hills. I suggested they might like biking in Russia. The Polish couple and I stayed together into the afternoon before parting ways. I continued east while they turned north to find somewhere more remote. They were noticeably bothered by the 10 cars that passed us today. I enjoyed their company, but was just as glad to be back on my own. Despite the harsh and desolate nature of Mongolia, the land itself has a gentle quality. The mountains roll like waves without cliffs or sharp edges. The valleys are spacious and flat, with shallow, meandering rivers. There's nothing tall or deep. This is why I was so surprised to arrive on the lip of a canyon, 200 feet across, with 70-foot cliffs dropping to a slope of broken stone and a large, fast-flowing river. I had discovered the Chilute River Gorge, cutting through the earth like a wound in the otherwise unmarred land. I was just as surprised when the gorge disappeared. In only 4 miles, I reached the place where the water flowed on top of the land. The road crossed the river there, over a narrow bridge. I've been cooking at night, and every 8 days or so, I need to find more diesel fuel for my stove. Today, I filled my aluminum fuel bottle at a 1-pump gas station outside of a small town. I didn't notice the lid wasn't sealed when I put the bottle back in my pannier. Most of the fuel leaked out, saturating the towel given to me at the Russian gas station and contaminating some of my drinking water. I was set up to camp high on a hill when I discovered my mistake. I didn't want to carry the gas-soaked towel with me, nor did I want to leave the towel there. I placed the wet fabric in a pile on the ground and got out my lighter. I ignited the gasoline fumes just as the stars were coming out. A small fireball engulfed the towel, then quickly grew much bigger and brighter than I expected, flaring up higher than my waist and lasting a full minute before exhausting the fuel. I wondered if I'd drawn anyone's attention to investigate. From my perch on the hill, I looked out 20 miles to the horizon. The land was dark and still, and for as far as I could see, there was nobody and nothing. August 9th, 2013, hammock earring in Mongolia. I saw a dozen shooting stars last night, and one of them was truly spectacular, with a long, burning tail that stretched from the sky straight above me, almost to the horizon. They're the Perseid meteors, the burning remnants of a comet's tail. I actually have a piece of meteorite with me, one of 4 small rocks that I've brought along as good luck charms. I don't subscribe to the idea of changing my luck with a bag of rocks, but there's no denying that I have them with me. The piece of black meteorite is the size of my thumb tip, a fragment from a 3,000 kilogram mass that impacted Algeria 13 years ago. Cataloged as NWA 869, the alien stone formed 12.5 billion years ago, relatively soon after the literal beginning of time. At nearly 3 times the age of the Earth, the meteorite is one of the oldest known artifacts of creation, an ancient explorer traversing the universe. Now, the meteorite is along for a tour of the Earth, my home. After such a long life, I hope this time with me stands out as a high point. This morning, I had a stomachache and suspected an ice cream I ate yesterday. Going by appearance, I thought I was buying an orange creamsicle, but that was wishful thinking. I bit into frozen cheese on a stick, similar in flavor to the hard cheese I've been given in the yurts. The texture was a little grainy, and the flavor wasn't for me, but I ate the whole thing because I was too hungry not to. I don't know what a cheese popsicle was supposed to taste like, so maybe the milk had gone bad, and I didn't even realize. I wasn't feeling social with my stomach hurting, but stopping was impossible without someone coming to see what I was doing. For a place that seemed so empty, I was challenged to be alone. While I biked, anyone within earshot would yell out and wave until I acknowledged them. Even when I passed a man squatting with his pants down as he defecated on a hillside, he yelled to me and waved. I did wave back, but avoided looking in his direction. Late in the day, I found a spring at the top of a hill and began to refill my water. The process is slow. One small pump at a time takes me an hour to fill the 10 liters of bottles that I am now carrying. I had just started when 3 boys, about 12 years old, arrived with an unruly horse. It made me uncomfortable. I was afraid the horse would step on my bike and didn't feel like being watched for the next hour. Wanting to be alone, I filled only a single bottle, then left. The next place I crossed the stream was at the bottom of the hill, after I had passed 20 yurts and 1,000 animals. Too many for me to want to drink the water. I'm going to be thirsty in the morning, but this area is not particularly dry. I'm sure I'll find something to drink tomorrow. I finished the day halfway up a climb toward the next pass. A grove of trees appeared in a nook of the mountain, and I couldn't pass up the chance to hang my hammock. Compared to sleeping on the open land like I have been, I feel well hidden in this little forest. Now, I'm lying in my hammock, looking up at the leaves and dark sky. The patch of pretty wildflowers next to me fills the air with a sweet scent. I feel tired and happy. August 10th, 2013, a great day biking. I finished climbing over the mountain this morning, then found a spring on my way down the other side. A display of blue prayer flags marked a flowing pipe stuck into the hillside. Other people were there with me, and I felt a pleasant sense of community as we took turns filling our jugs. Past the spring was the city of Tetzerleg. I met a man from France and his translator there. Then, an hour outside of town, they were passing by and stopped to give me a Swiss roll and water. Shortly after that, 2 men on a motorcycle tour, whom I met yesterday, stopped to say hello and gave me water as well. I felt popular bumping into people I knew. I always like when I get to see someone twice. Throughout the day, the wind pushed me 75 miles down a paved 2-lane road. I felt relaxed as I rode along, free to look around at the world instead of focusing on the next bump in front of my wheel. Around me was a bucolic scene of rolling hills dotted with sheep, yaks, and horses grazing in large numbers. Stripes of rainbows shone brightly beneath the afternoon thunderstorms. I pedaled along, feeling really good. At the end of the day, I pushed my bike out into the treeless landscape and set up camp on the grass. As I sat on the ground eating my pot of rice, I admired the state of dishevelment that Mongolia has brought me to. My pants are sagging low on my hips because my belt buckle has broken. I've tied the fabric strap around me like a rope, but that isn't working as well. I had such large holes in my socks that I actually sewed them during a break today. This shirt I'm wearing continues to fall apart as more holes appear daily. I'm covered in fine dust. Looking this way doesn't bother me. Every nuanced detail of my deteriorating appearance makes me proud. They are the badges of my enduring journey. While my gear is wearing out, my body is growing stronger. I've become accustomed to the long days of pedaling, forced upon me by Mongolian roads. But they are still challenging in every aspect. I'm forced to try hard more than has ever been required of me. I think of the half Ironman race I completed years ago, a 7-hour effort that felt like a big accomplishment at the time. Now I'm exercising for 8 hours every day, and there are no juice stations or cheering spectators. No finish line either. Just a place in the dirt to lie down for the night. This is much harder. My mental toughness is also going through a training camp right now. The persistent effort requires a psychic rigor that I've only been able to achieve during college finals, when I would sit and study every waking hour for the last 10 days of the semester. They were moments of perfect discipline that would leave me fully depleted. I have that same sense of focus right now, helping me maintain my pace, steady my emotions, and keep my strict rations. The trials of crossing Mongolia have gone far beyond the exercise, the physical exhaustion, and the mental focus. The brutal heat waves wear on me, stinging my eyes with sweat. A persistent sense of scarcity and growing hunger gnaws at my attention. I feel as if I am pushing up against the edge of what I can tolerate. Beyond my body and my mind, I am now testing my will. August 11th, 2013. Really nice day. I traveled through rolling hills, past herds of animals grazing under fine blue skies. I felt great, buoyant even. My mind was saturated with endorphins from weeks of hard exercise. My body felt good as well. Every day my legs are tired, but they are getting stronger too. The pavement ended in a small town at midday. From there, I turned south onto a lightly used track not shown on any of my maps. Going off map makes me nervous. The feeling is adjacent to being lost, though not as severe. I know where I started, and I know where I'm going. I just don't know where I am. I was looking for a good place to cross a small stream when a man arrived on his motorcycle. He had a pair of green, knee-high rubber boots to wear over his shoes, just for this purpose. Seeing my situation, he offered them to me so I could stay dry while I pushed my bike across. He got up a little speed on his motorcycle and drove through the water, lifting his feet at the deepest point. The man was jovial and animated. On the other side of the stream, I took a photo of the boots, then he wanted to pose for a picture too. He wrapped his thick gray overcoat a little tighter around himself, squatted down next to his motorcycle, cocked his baseball cap to the side, and smiled. Before leaving, he gave me a biscuit and candy from his overcoat pocket. A short time later, a Mongolian man caught up to me in a small car. He was a little younger than me and wore a desert camouflage hat and 2 dog tags around his neck. He knew enough English for us to have a conversation and told me that he was a sergeant in the Mongolian Armed Forces and served alongside American troops in Afghanistan. He got out an iPad to show me pictures of his time at war. In one photo, he was smiling with American troops in front of an American flag. In a very real way, this Mongolian man risked his life avenging the death of Americans. I imagined him as a 10-year-old, sleeping in a yurt somewhere near here, while 6,000 miles away, the Twin Towers were falling. A decade later, he would travel 2,000 miles in the other direction to fight in a war that had nothing to do with him. Out here, riding my bike all day, I sometimes forget how complicated the world is. The soldier wanted to introduce me to what he called the Mongolian national drink. We walked to the back of his car where he opened the trunk to reveal 4 large plastic jugs of fermented mare's milk that he was taking to the next town to sell. He went rummaging through his vehicle for something to drink out of, and when I saw him consider dumping out a nearly empty bottle of Windex, I offered we use my cup. He took the top off of each of the 25-liter jugs to let gas out, explaining that they explode if he doesn't check them every few miles. Looking in, I could see a dozen unlit matches floating on top of the milk in different jugs. I asked him about them, but his language skills were stretched to explain that if the gas can be ignited by a lit match, then the drink is too strong. That didn't resolve the mystery of the unlit matches, but I wasn't able to get any further with the conversation. He poured a full cup, then handed the drink to me. I got through half, then handed the cup back to him to finish. The taste was sour, like bile. I shook the soldier's hand, thanked him for the milk and for his military service. He drove away over the next hill and was the last person I saw for the rest of the day. Through the afternoon and into evening, I was alone in the white space of my map. At the top of a slow rolling pass, I discovered a beautiful uvu with stones piled as high as my shoulders in the shape of a half sphere. Protruding towards the sky from the center was a thick wooden stake adorned with blue cloth. The road was nothing more than twin tire ruts, and they split to pass on either side of the uvu, making the monument useful for preventing accidents at the blind hilltop. Resting in with the stones were small offerings of coins, cookies, trinkets, and hard candy. I ate some of the candy, Feeding a hungry traveler must be in the spirit of any offering made in this vast land. When the daylight began to fade, I stopped on a hill for the night. This place is beautiful and empty of anyone else for as far as I can see. A reddish haze has settled, and the crescent moon is dropping over the horizon. While I ate dinner, I listened to an Alan Watts lecture. He expounded on the idea of life being fundamentally an opportunity to play. There is a lightheartedness about that perspective that speaks to me. To live a playful life, or even that our purpose is to play. I feel myself embodying that philosophy. Riding my bike, sleeping on the ground, I'm playing. The game is to have a meaningful life. August 12, 2013. Another fine day. This morning, I followed slowly behind a boy on a horse driving 80 cows towards the day's pasture. I thought to pass, but the cows were headbutting each other on the road in front of me. I stayed back and watched as the boy kept the herd moving. He was a skilled rider, agile and balanced, and took to the task with teenage energy. Running at high speeds, he reined the cows in on the right, swept behind, then directed the cows back on the left. Back and forth he went, prodding them with a long wooden staff. Even giving his full effort, the boy was barely able to keep the herd together, and 3 ornery cows broke away from the pack to run back down the hill. In the afternoon, on a bare hillside, I saw a large symbol with a Buddhist aesthetic made from stones and gold-painted logs. Interestingly, today's date was written just below using white logs that were taller than a man. Rearranging them would be no small task, and judging by the traffic, only about a dozen people a day were even likely to see. Yet every day, they would need to be updated. I thought about the man who had taken on the infinite task of timekeeping, knowing that his very best effort was doomed to fall short, like Sisyphus, forever rolling a boulder up a hill, or me, trying to reach the horizon on a bicycle. Late in the day, I found a small town with a store and a bakery. I bought a load of water as well as 6 days worth of food. That's 3 loaves of bread, 3 pounds of rice, 3 jars of vegetables, and 2 pounds of sugar cookies. Along with the water, I could fit nothing else. At the edge of town, a dozen dirt tracks pointed off into the distance, and I couldn't tell which way to go. I asked a man outside the market for help. He pointed to 2 mountains in the distance and said to go between them. Those are good directions in this landscape. I thanked him and chose a track heading that way. As evening approached, I pulled off the road and laid out my bivvy on a patch of thick grass. Under a purple sky, I watched the sun set and ate warm rice while mosquitoes buzzed in my ears. August 13th, 2013. More horse meat. A lightning storm came through last night just after dark. I laid in the blackness of my bivvy, wide-eyed, listening to the soothing pattern of gentle rain, mixed with the terrifying booms of electric bolts so close they sizzled. When I emerged after the storm, the sky was clear and beautiful. I saw a few bright shooting stars before falling asleep. Throughout the night, I was startled awake by horses walking by, and when they woke me up at dawn, I got up to leave. I biked into a grassy plain big enough that the mountains nearly disappeared over the horizon. A Mongolian man wearing a purple coat and a fisherman's hat was there on his motorcycle. He's looking for his animals. I watched him open a small case to reveal a fine pair of binoculars, and bringing them to his eyes, he scanned the horizon. In the rolling hills behind me, no one needed binoculars because the animals were easy to spot on the hillsides. But in the expansive plain, seeing a lost herd in the distance was a real challenge. I got a picture of the man sitting on his motorcycle, wearing his purple robe, the flat land extending far behind him. I carried on slowly, trying to avoid mud puddles and sand. I made progress through the morning until my stomach began to hurt. My pace dragged from the discomfort, and eventually I stopped to sleep, hoping the pain would pass. The temperature hovered in the mid-90s, and nothing in sight offered any shade. Without even a stand to use, I simply laid my bike over on the ground and put my face in the shadow of the pannier. Sometime later, I woke up dripping with sweat and feeling better. I pulled into a very small town called Bayangol. A large round man in an old Russian truck stopped to talk to me. His shirt read, "Mongolia says meat is for man, grass is for animals." There seems to be a strong anti-vegetable movement here. He didn't speak English, so I got out my map to show him what I was doing. He looked astounded, then offered to drive me to his yurt for food. I asked him what direction, and he pointed close enough to the way I was going. I loaded my bike into his truck bed and climbed aboard. The town's police officer also joined us. A thin young man from Ulaanbaatar. He was hitchhiking home for the weekend to be with his wife and child. This rural post is his assignment as a freshman officer. He knew how to say in very clear English the one phrase he was taught at the police academy. "Hello, how may I help you?" He repeated the word several times and laughed. That was the only English he knew. We drove around town for the next 40 minutes, first to the police officer's house so he could change. Then 2 children climbed in for a 20-second ride to the neighbors. We stopped at a birthday party, and the hospital too. There was a spring in the center of town, nothing more than a pipe jutting out of the ground with a faucet on the end. I assume the spring is the reason the town exists at all. The man used a short hose to fill 2 barrels in the back of the truck. I followed along as the policeman and driver took off their shirts, then rinsed themselves under the cold water. When I peeled off my shirt, they pointed at my chest hair and laughed. I've never thought of myself as a particularly hairy guy, but seeing the bald chests of the other men, I guess I am in this part of the world. They also laughed at my polka dot tan from all the holes in my shirt. The last thing we did before leaving town was to pick up 2 little girls and 2 more neighbors. The truck was big, but 7 of us stuffed on the bench seat was a lot. One of the little girls sat on the seat between my legs. She fell asleep, and I held her upright so her face wouldn't smack against the dashboard as we bounced over the uneven road. We stopped to drop off the neighbors and went inside to have a cup of fermented horse milk, or Mongolian Coca-Cola, as the policeman joked. I walked into the yurt to find a big fat man sitting in the back, facing the door, and smoking a joint. We sat down on the ground, and he passed what he was smoking to me. I wasn't sure what was in the joint, and with the policeman along, I felt obliged to be on my best behavior. I declined, but the policeman and driver both took long drags. The truck driver who picked me up was a big guy too, funny and animated. When we arrived at his yurt, he cheerfully invited me inside. I'd hardly sat down before he handed me a cup of what he called Mongolia coffee, which seemed to be just plain horse milk. He also offered me a large metal bowl half filled with oily horse meat. I wondered how long the meat had been sitting in the hot yurt, but I decided I was more hungry than concerned and picked out a big piece to eat. There were 4 long-legged horses lashed to the post outside. Their height and the fact that they were tied up caught my attention. On the altar in the back of the driver's yurt was a shelf of trophies and medals. He'd won them from horse breeding, and specifically racing horses. I thought about the horse I was chewing on and wondered how the last race went for him. Before leaving, I spent a half hour filtering water from the barrel in the back of the truck. The driver's children were there, 2 girls and 2 boys, all under 10. They watched me with a sort of tired fascination. For being so young, I was surprised by how still and patient they were. From the height of the truck, I looked around at the empty landscape and saw very little to stimulate a child. I wondered if they had ever even seen a tree. After thanking the man and waving goodbye to his children, I bicycled another hour into the evening before pulling over to set up camp behind a small hill. I'm on the ground tonight, among tiny wildflowers and clumps of stiff grass. I just finished my dinner of rice and dry bread. A gentle, pink sunset is swirling across the edge of the sky. August 14th, 2013. Missed a turn. Still lying on the ground, I watched the sun rise over the horizon. A man drove a herd of horses past me. I packed up my camp and began again. The sun was hot on my back, and through the middle of the day, the temperature hovered around 100 degrees. I've been adding bottles of water and now carry 10 liters with me. But by noon, I finished nearly all of what I had. I was looking for more when I arrived in a village of about 60 yurts. I couldn't find a spring, so I settled on drinking from the muddy river adjacent to the town. Even after running through my filter, the water was still cloudy. Not far from the town, my front wheel sank into the sand, and I was forced to push. My thighs were burning as I wrestled my bike forward, fighting and falling as I dragged my gear over the small dunes. I was struggling. After an hour of this, my mood approached despair. I was having fantasies of a white taxi van coming along to whisk me off to solid ground, or even all the way to China. But the road was empty, and no one was coming to help. My only option was to keep moving. Wiping sweat from my eyes, I pushed farther into the desert. The most torturous part was that I couldn't know how long the sand would persist. The Polish couple I biked with 6 days ago had to cross a 20-mile sand dune, pushing the whole way. I think of this story every time my front tire sinks into the soft road. So far, I've only had to contend with wind-swept sand drifts, but I fear there could be worse ahead. I'm edging into the Gobi Desert, and I don't know what to expect. In one area, the road became so dim that I veered onto a separate track without realizing my mistake. I went a few arduous miles, climbing into the sandy mountains in what seemed to be the wrong direction. I wanted to go east, but the track was taking me south. I suspected that I missed a turn, but I hadn't seen another way to go. I continued on, unsure if I was lost and feeling frustrated. I could accept pushing my bike through sandy mountains if I was going the right direction, but to think I was trying this hard just to have to turn around was really quite depressing. What I am doing is so physically demanding that I obsess over being efficient, and the suspicion that I was wasting hours of hard effort caused my mood to dive. I was in low spirits when I arrived at a narrow river flowing through the mountains, and to my great surprise, a tourist camp was there. The rooms were a collection of yurts set up on platforms, and there was also a permanent building with a restaurant, running water, showers, indoor bathrooms, and even a sauna. The place is empty except for 2 women who confirmed that I was lost. They indicated I should continue the way I was going to get back on the road. After feeling lost for miles, I was desperate and asked if anyone was driving over there. Maybe a truck that could carry me away. They plainly told me no. With that rejection, my despair suddenly lifted. There was exactly one solution: to take myself forward. Once I accepted this, I was able to commit. Before leaving, I dumped my cloudy water, then went into the bathroom to refill in the sink. I saw myself in a mirror for the first time since leaving Novosibirsk a month ago. My clothes looked dirtier and more tattered than I thought they were. My hair was long, matted and salty. My beard filled in below my jawline, though my mustache was still thin. I could see in my cheeks that I have lost weight. On my forehead, there were dark circles that I thought were bruises, but on closer inspection, I realized that they were tan spots from the sun shining through the holes in my helmet. I looked rough, but perhaps that was to be expected. With my water refilled, I left the resort back onto the sandy road. I probably could have stayed, but once I had directions and water, the camp had nothing else I wanted. I plodded forward for the rest of the day, enjoying the quiet and appreciating the gentle rolling landscape. This evening, I'm lying on the ground, resting my tired legs. A warm wind is blowing. Dark clouds move across the sky, causing the stars to come and go. There are no yurts or animals in sight, only me and the tranquil night. August 15th, 2013, in the desert. I slept near a mountain pass last night, and the few vehicles that came through beeped their horns at the top of the hill. I'm not sure if they do that for good luck, or if the drivers can't see over the hill well enough to know if someone is coming from the other direction. The beeping annoyed me. The place was so empty I could have been the last man on earth, yet I was being woken up by the traffic. Storms blowing through in spurts also pulled me from my sleep. I felt the whipping wind press hard against my body, while the loose fabric of the bivvy slapped like a whip. In my half-sleep I tried to silence the flapping with my legs, but to no avail. By the end of the night, I could no longer sleep, and simply laid in the dark, waiting for daybreak. Through the morning and afternoon, I pedaled across the sandy windswept plain. There were no yurts or vegetation, nor any natural features to indicate my progress. Ahead of me, a mirage of water remained just out of reach. To my right, electrical lines hung from a row of wooden crosses, reaching straight to the horizon in both directions. Hours passed, and I couldn't tell if I was anywhere different. In the middle of the empty expanse, I met a shirtless man about my age with his 2 small daughters. They were on a motorcycle, shepherding a herd of 2 humped camels and goats. One girl sat on the seat between her father's legs, and the second little girl sat behind with her arms wrapped tightly around him. They were adorable going around together like that. The track I was following petered out when I hit sand 6 miles from a town. I got off to wrestle my bike forward under the pounding sun. Sweat stung my eyes and hot sand quickly filled my shoes. I struggled slowly onward for more than an hour until a white taxi van pulled up next to me and stopped. The driver slid open the side door and without giving me an option said to put my bike inside. I told him I was okay pushing, but that didn't make sense to him. He couldn't understand why I was out there in the first place, and to be honest, I was starting to wonder the same thing. I climbed inside with my bike and one other woman, then we drove into the town. There was a well in the middle of the town, the kind with a big cast iron handle and a faucet head. 4 boys in their early teens stood around and watched me pump water. I asked them their names, and one said Michael Jordan, getting a laugh from the others. Across Mongolia, I've seen several kids wearing Michael Jordan shirts, and this boy had a Jumpman logo on his hat. Seemingly, Michael Jordan's celebrity has taken 2 decades to reach the farthest corners of the globe. Or, Jordan is more popular than I realize, and these children in rural Mongolia are tapped into the cultural zeitgeist better than I am. I wouldn't be surprised either way. As the sun began to sink over the horizon, I found myself in the middle of a wide open plain. There was nothing around me to hide behind, not for many miles. I didn't have the energy to carry on, so I pushed my bike 100 yards from the road to sleep on the ground. Hopefully for tonight, no one will be driving this way. August 16th, 2013. Another pretty sunset. A shot of adrenaline sat me upright as 2 headlights stopped a few paces from where I was sleeping on the ground. I put my hand up to block the glare from my eyes and could make out 2 figures in the front seat. A large man climbed out of the driver's side door and came to me where I remained seated on the ground next to my bike. With the lights in my eyes, I could only see his silhouette. I felt vulnerable with him standing over me. Pushing down my fear, I defaulted to smiling and saying hello. He said something I didn't understand. All I could think of was to tell him what I tell everyone I meet. I spun my balled fists as if pedaling, saying Katai, then pointing in the direction of China. The man said something else I couldn't understand. I put the palms of my hands together, then placed them on the side of my head like a pillow, explaining that I was sleeping here. He looked at my bike, pointed at my trailer, squeezed the tires. Exactly the same interaction I have with everyone I meet out here. With a wave, he invited me to join him at his truck. He wanted to drink vodka with me, but I declined. I was still sitting in the headlights and mostly wanted him to leave. He kept the vodka in the truck and said goodbye before driving away. In the late morning, I followed the road along a dry riverbed into a serpentine canyon rimmed by low black walls. There, I discovered a dozen short desert poplars growing in the sandy soil. One stood out as the largest and farthest upstream, the mother of them all. The trunk was a meter in diameter, and the branches were hard and scraggly. To grow so large in this harsh environment would take many hundreds of years. I stopped for a moment to rest in her ancient shadow. A dozen miles farther, and I found myself on a large plain with herds of camels walking across the land. I've never been around camels, especially in their natural habitat. I found them unsettling. They were larger than a horse and had long, dexterous necks like an arm with a head. The humps were strange too, more flaccid and wobbly than I expected, like molded jello. With every step, the camels kicked out their heels to the side, and when they trotted, they rocked back and forth with an odd gait, moving both their legs on the right and both on the left. The tracks in the sand showed they had two wide, flat toes to keep from sinking in. I was envious of this adaptation. Over 50 times today, the sand forced me to get off and push. Sometimes I saw the sand coming, but more frequently, the road simply gave way beneath me. In one instinctual motion, I would lay my bike down while stepping clear over the handlebars, something that I wouldn't be able to do if I had to think about every movement. After heaving my heavy bike upright, then wrestling my gear through the soft sand, I'd arrive back on solid ground. Hoisting my leg over the bike, I would step on the pedal, push off with my other foot, then go until the ground crumbled beneath me again. From sunup to sundown, I struggled to move myself forward. My bike computer recorded 9 hours of pedaling to cover 40 miles, and in this heat, I had to drink 8 liters of water to offset my sweating. The effort was exhilarating in a way. I needed to be strong, so I got to feel strong. Over the past 6 months, I've been honing my body and hardening my resolve, and today was a beautiful exploration of how far I've come. I felt physically powerful and tireless. I'm proud of the strength and grit I have cultivated in myself. Lying here on the ground at the end of the day, my legs twitching from exhaustion, I'm truly impressed by my own effort. This is a good place to have arrived at the end of such a long day. Around me is a broad rolling plain of thin grass with small white flowers. Venus is drifting on the receding orange tide of a magnificent sunset, and the gibbous moon has been captured by a white halo. A perfect panorama of fantastic natural beauty. August 17th, 2013. Breadcrumbs. This morning I was caught off guard by a patch of sand and fell hard with my bike. I had to walk off the pain and take a few deep breaths. Except for a scraped elbow and jarred nerves, I'm fine. Traveling this land is emotionally precarious as much as physically difficult. I manage all right when I feel in control of my destiny, but the illusion is broken when I'm bracing for impact. I arrived in the small village of Konkangor, which was nothing more than a dozen permanent structures and a few lots with yurts. My supplies were diminished to a handful of breadcrumbs and one last drink of water. I went looking for a shop and a well, but there was nothing. The only people I saw were a mother and her young daughter. The little girl called out to me, and they smiled as I approached. The mother handed her a small bottle of water, and she ran over excitedly to give the water to me. I smiled and thanked her, then waved to the mother. Leaving the village, I could see another small town at the base of a distant hill. I expected I would be there soon, but I was deceived. The hill in the distance was a mountain, and the town was a city. I was looking 16 miles across the broad valley. Getting to the bottom took me an hour, and climbing back up required 2 more. By the time I arrived, the breadcrumbs and water were long gone. My stomach growled, and my mouth was too dry to swallow. The city was called Don Zadgan, and was one of the most populous places I've been through in Mongolia. The small downtown area had paved streets, a bank, and a hotel, but not much more than that. The first thing I did was find a small shop where I could buy water. I chugged a liter right there, then put 15 more on my bike. 5 more than I had been carrying because I keep running out. I also bought bread, cheese, rice, and canned vegetables, enough for 3 more days. The center of the city had a small park built around a dry fountain. Many of the towns have dry fountains in them, and every one of them is in a state of disrepair. I can understand why they are neglected. In the hot desert, a flowing pool of water could only be seen as wasteful. And the winters bring freezing temperatures for 5 months of the year. The people must have imagined an oasis to gather around. Instead, they got a decaying reminder of their unforgiving environment. Near the fountain, I unexpectedly found an open Wi-Fi network and sat in the shade to call Katie. I missed her and smiled when I heard her voice. She was cooking dinner with her roommates after getting back from meeting a friend at the climbing gym. This was a work day for her, and she had been at home in front of her computer all day. With her research paper submitted, she's anxiously awaiting to hear if any journals accept her work. I told Katie about my day too, about how hungry I was eating only breadcrumbs, and my struggles with the sand and the heat. I spoke about the unease I feel around camels, and explained my growing fixation on finding water. I told her my clothes were falling apart, but that they still work for now. I told her I missed her. After we hung up, I wondered if our current lives could be any more different. I bike right to the end of the day to cover 49 miles. Mongolia is wearing me down, and I'm looking forward to getting to the paved roads of China, now only 4 days away. I've begun to daydream about all the fruit I'll eat there. When I had nothing to drink this morning, I thought about watermelons. For hours, I could think of nothing else. Once again, I am in a landscape with nowhere to hide. Each night as the moon waxes towards full, I can see and be seen a little more clearly. Tonight, the bright moonlight has me feeling exposed and on edge. My ears are perked, but all I hear is the wind. August 18th, 2013. Found water. The emptiness is the most notable thing about this landscape. Throughout the day, I saw only 3 vehicles, and not a single yurt. Nothing grows. The grazing animals are gone, and even the camels have disappeared. The only wildlife I saw were moths and small lizards running from my wheels. Even from the hilltops, I would look out to see only the land and sky. Across this barren landscape, I'm still trying to clear 50 miles each day, because to go less risks running out of food and water before I arrive somewhere to get more. On the sandy roads, my habit is to check my progress at noon, and each day, I feel a pang of despair to see that despite my best effort, I never get very far. Knowing that I have 8 more hours of daylight left to cover the miles leaves me feeling both grateful and exasperated. As I've crossed Mongolia and probed deeper into the desert, my relationship with water has evolved. Day by day I get thirstier as the sun beats down and I ration every drink. I want more, but more is not available. Eventually I become desperate. With the amount of water I can carry, 2 days pass as I go from having more than I could possibly drink to being happy to find a trickling stream than a vein of gold. When a cistern appeared in the afternoon, I felt a giddy joyfulness as I refilled my bottles and reset the clock. 2 more days until desperation sets in again. As evening approached, I needed a mental escape and put on headphones to listen to an episode of This American Life about summer camps. Stories were told about sing-alongs, camaraderie, competition, and small dramas of relationship. I paused when the episode was over to observe my barren surroundings and the sandy road ahead. I had been biking for 7 hours with a few more to go. The temperature was 90 degrees without shade or water anywhere. My clothes were filthy and ragged. I had a gnawing hunger, and for dinner, I was planning to eat crunchy, undercooked rice because I can't spare the water to make the grain soft. This is the summer camp I wanted, and looking around, I seemed to be the only one who signed up. I bicycled late into the evening, only stopping for brief moments to admire the magnificent sunset behind me. When darkness fell, I simply pushed my bike a few dozen paces from the rutted track, then laid out my sleeping bag on the red dirt between the wispy patches of grass. The world is silent, and I'm very tired. August 19th, 2013. Rain in the desert. Raindrops woke me in the night, and by morning, a drizzle had settled in. A dreary day in the desert seemed so out of place that I expected the rain to stop at any moment, though the clouds never did look like they were going anywhere. I saw a golden eagle as I crossed a large, open, and empty flat. Those sharp-eyed birds seek out the highest perch to observe the world. They can reach the top of any tree and the peak of every mountain. Yet there she was, sitting on a gray stone half the height of my knee, too proud to actually be on the ground. There really was nothing taller in sight, and she watched me as I slowly pedaled past. 25 miles into my day, I pulled onto glorious pavement. I was so happy that I cheered. From there, the road would be paved all the way to China. I felt a wave of relief, knowing that the sand and washboard were behind me, and civilization was ahead. In the morning, 2 men on a motorcycle stopped to say hello. 2 hours later, I saw them again just as they were arriving back at their yurt. The men were construction workers from China, building the road I was so grateful to be on. They waved for me to come in from the rain, and I followed them inside to sit on the ground in their sparsely filled yurt. They had a small pile of clothes and rugs to sleep on. The stove was a discarded steel bucket with other construction debris cobbled together for the chimney. We were all cold from the rain, and one of the men got a fire started using wood from a broken pallet. He heated a kettle of black tea, then poured us all a cup. I stayed with them for an hour, sitting mostly in silence, sipping the tea, and listening to the pattering rain. The clouds broke up late in the day, and I pulled off the road to set up camp behind a low mound of earth. This isn't a great spot. The hard-packed ground is covered in small shards of broken stone. A cool wind is blowing, and I've seen packs of roaming dogs that I'm worried will find me in the night. Yet I feel so worn out that I don't expect any of this will keep me from sleeping. Crossing Mongolia has required my full effort. I'm now both mentally depleted and physically exhausted. The mile markers on the highway place me just 84 miles from the border. I'm almost there. August 20th, 2013. China's border. I woke to an overcast sky and pushed my bike to the road. Just as I was getting ready to begin, a small pickup truck stopped in front of me. The guy driving got out to greet me, and when I told him I was going to China, he offered me a ride. I was tired of Mongolia and wanted to put the desert behind me. I piled my gear into the back, then climbed into the cab. The man was on a work trip, driving to China from Ulaanbaatar. He showed me pictures of his family, and I tried to tell him about my journey. We struggled to communicate, and mostly sat in silence. I looked out the window and felt no sense of disappointment that the landscape was racing past. There was only desert, dry and still. 15 miles from the border, we entered a slum that also served as a dry port for the goods coming in. Hundreds of trucks were loading and unloading, stopping for repairs or taking breaks. Mechanics sat outside their greasy tin shacks surrounded by stacks of enormous tires. Fenced-off lots as large as soccer fields warehoused coal. Everything was covered in sand, black dust, and diesel soot. We pulled into a small tin and brick building blackened by the dirty air. The driver walked around chatting like he knew the people there. I followed along until we found a small restaurant with 3 tables. My new friend bought us lunch, stir-fry with chewy, unidentifiable meat, a few vegetables and rice, all served on a cast-iron plate in the shape of a bull. The food was delicious and made me excited for the good meals ahead of me in China. I was given chopsticks for the first time as well. I imagined a map with borders drawn by which utensil is used, and after 6 months, I had finally crossed the Kingdom of Forks. We got back on the road to drive the last dozen miles to the border and quickly came to a toll booth. Like a true Mongolian, the man turned off the pavement to make his own road, and he wasn't the first to do so. To deter people from skipping the toll, a deep trench with sheer walls ran alongside the highway for many miles. We raced to the desert at high speed, looking for a place to cross the ditch. The man was having fun, and I was hanging on. Eventually, we found a narrow spot where the trench had caved in, and we could get back onto the road. We arrived at the border, and I climbed out of the truck to talk with the agent at the gate. His English was fluent, and he kindly explained that the border crossing was for Mongolian and Chinese citizens only. Pointing to the east, he said that I would need to go 400 kilometers to the international crossing. I followed his finger to look out at the driest landscape I have ever seen, the depths of the Gobi Desert. I made a half-hearted attempt to convince him to let me cross, but he had no authority to break the rules. He said the only way was to get a note from the capital. Dejected, I unloaded my things from the truck and thanked the driver for his help. He gave me a shrug and a half smile. I understood he wished he could have helped more. I watched him drive away and disappear into China. I had given my full physical and emotional effort to reach the border, and to be rebuffed at the gate threw me careening towards despair. I was exhausted and no longer had the will to go deeper into the desert, to persist on the edge, to keep trying so damn hard. I looked around at the hot, merciless landscape and back down the long road I had just arrived on. As much as I wished otherwise, there was no one coming to rescue me. I would have to rescue myself. I took a deep breath, stayed my emotions, and began. My paper map had one other option, to cut across the heart of the desert. There was not a continuous road shown, but this way would shorten the trip by 150 miles. I weighed my options carefully, but in the end, my decision was an emotional one. I was beginning to crack and needed to get out of Mongolia as fast as I could. The shorter route required me to go 25 miles east to a road that paralleled the one I was on, but my map showed no way to get there. I biked down the highway until I found 2 tire ruts in the sand heading in the right direction. I got out my map again to study for any detail that would help me make the decision, but there was little to go on. With great trepidation, I rolled off the pavement and pedaled into the empty desert. Miles later, the sound of trucks faded away behind me, and I was alone. Tracks pointed across the land in many directions, and I realized the road I wanted might be hard to recognize when I got there. I began to second-guess myself, and the safety of the highway beckoned me to turn around. I was losing my confidence with every passing mile. My salvation came in the form of fresh pavement pointing north and south to the horizon. I checked my maps again and saw nothing. Seemingly, I discovered a previously unknown highway. There was also a small facility with a few cars in the parking lot, and feeling very confused, I went inside to ask for directions. I pulled the door closed behind me and turned to see the shocked faces of a half-dozen office workers. I remembered my long beard and tattered clothing and wondered what they were thinking. They got up from their desks, and I was given a bottle of water while they gathered around to look at my map. One of them pointed out that the road I was trying to get to was not a road at all, but a border between states. I held the map close to my face. The photocopy wasn't good to begin with. The paper was deteriorating from 2 trips across Mongolia, and the text was in Russian. Misreading the map might have been a grave mistake if a highway hadn't inexplicably appeared to stop me. I would have wandered deep into the desert, searching for a dashed line in the sand. I got on the highway heading north, as was suggested to me. The road was quiet except for an occasional construction vehicle. Most of the drivers stopped to see if I was all right and to give me water. I could see them wondering how I got there. When a Land Cruiser stopped, a mining engineer and his driver got out to talk to me. The engineer spoke fluent English and asked where I was going. I told him that I found the road unexpectedly and was following the pavement north, explaining that I didn't know where I was or where I was going. Laughing, he asked if I knew where I had come from. Portugal, I replied, pointing 6,000 miles to the west. I'm not sure how desperate I looked, but he was inclined to help. The engineer explained that I was on the service road going to Oyu Tolgoi, an open pit mine with one of the world's largest deposits of copper. The engineer said to keep biking north, and the driver would come back at the end of the day to take me to his home in Konbogdi. I thanked them before they sped away and left me alone to pedal through the heat. I bicycled down the empty road feeling a sense of self-pity I had never known. I was supposed to be done with Mongolia. The desert should have been behind me. I wanted a way out of my dreary situation, but the only thing I could do was to pedal, hour after hour under the hot sun. I reached a deeply low point and wallowed there. By the time the driver returned, the sky was beginning to lighten with another long and beautiful sunset. We stuffed my bike into the back and took off at high speed. In Mongolia, the speed limit is dictated only by the bravery of the driver, and as we left the pavement, the man accelerated. He knew the road well and took to driving like a rally racer. My seatbelt was broken, so I held on to the dashboard as we slammed over washboard tracks and drifted around corners. On a technical ridgeline, he slowed to a crawl as we bounced over large boulders. I could see the town of Konbogdi far below, a grid of fences with yurts in each square. When we arrived to the driver's yurt, his wife was there, cooking stew and rice on a small gas burner. The man's young son watched a cartoon on a large flat-screen TV that overwhelmed the small space. Another woman arrived with 2 babies, and we all ate dinner together. No one spoke English, so I sat quietly on the bed, enjoying their company. After we ate, the driver took me to a little 6-room inn and handed me off to the owner. I was considering biking out of town to sleep on the ground and save the money, but that's a strange thing to do here as well as everywhere else. And already being at the end, I was compelled to stay. For $10 I got my own room with a bed made from a few blankets over plywood and a pillow filled with sand. The toilet is a hole in the ground behind the end with a cinder block wall on 3 sides and no roof or door. I passed on taking a shower, which was just a cold bucket of water. Mostly I wanted to eat quickly, then sleep, but the owner of the inn and his other guests, a large young man and his girlfriend, came into my room. They spoke a little English, so we chatted as best we could while they looked over my things and watched me eat. They would have stayed longer, but I urged them out as they began to get comfortable. The walls here are thin, and as I lay down for the night, I couldn't avoid hearing the couple having sex. I haven't slept indoors in 3 weeks, and I'm reminded why that is. August 21st, 2013. Crossing the unknown. The bed last night was less comfortable than laying on the ground, but the rest I did get helped settle my nerves. I went to sleep feeling apprehensive about crossing the next stretch of desert, but I woke up feeling more willing to try. The next town was 100 miles away, across a barren stretch of desert, and after nearly a month in Mongolia, I finally felt like I knew what supplies to bring. Essentially, as much food and water as I could possibly carry. I found a small store to buy 3 loaves of bread, berry-flavored jam, 1.5 pounds of rice, and 2 jars of vegetables. I then packed 20 liters of water, filling every spare bit of space in my bags and tying the rest on top. The woman running the little shop laughed at me as I tried to fit everything. My bike left the store 50 pounds heavier than when I arrived. If I can stick to my rations, I'll be supplied for 3 days. I stopped on the outskirts of town to assess my situation. Surrounding me was a vast brown expanse of low, rippling mountains, sparsely dotted with pale grass. I got out my map one more time to confirm that soon I would be lost. I was at the end of the black line, and ahead of me was only a blank white page. I looked east into the unknown, and felt as if I were standing on the edge of an abyss. The last yurt at the end of town was nearby, and I called to a woman who was busying herself there. With an inquisitive tone, I pointed which way I was going and said the name of the next town, Kotumbulag. Nodding, she then came over to give me directions. Extending her full arm to the east, she then jogged her hand left and drew in the air what I thought was a mountain before pointing east again. I'm not sure what language she was speaking, but her explanation was long enough to make me think that navigating would be difficult. At the very least, she confirmed that I was starting in the right direction. I pushed down the fear and uncertainty that welled within me. My psyche was too fragile to both feel those emotions and carry on in the face of them. Instead, I focused on what gave me confidence. In small and large ways, I have proven to myself that I have great strength in both my body and my will. I clung to that notion as I pedaled into the unknown. What I was getting myself into soon became clear. The temperature climbed into the high 90s. The ground became so dry that even tough Mongolian grasses failed to grow. The dim track that I followed split repeatedly. I tried to stay focused on the most well-worn path, but there were times I stopped to take a really hard look before simply guessing. A dozen miles in, and I couldn't tell if I was lost or not. I focused on moving forward to stave off my feelings of doubt. Late in the morning, I came across a single dead tree standing 8 feet tall. The top was split into 3 broken limbs, and a sky-blue strip of cloth hung from the center trunk like a necklace. With this detail, the tree took on the appearance of a dancer in the throes of exuberant joy. Face to the sky, arms thrust out and up, with a slight lean, as though the tree were about to be overcome by the moment, forget its roots, and fly. I was struck by the image, and for the rest of the day, I aspired to be as happy as that dead tree. In the afternoon, I approached an indistinguishable dark spot on a distant hill, and I made my way there while trying to guess what I was seeing. Only in the last 100 meters did I recognize a herd of camels lying on the ground. As I approached, they all lumbered to their feet and slowly walked to a dry trough positioned between me and them. I pulled to a stop in front of the 30 camels, all looking at me with great expectation on their long faces. A well was there too, but I had no way to get to the water. I couldn't help them, and for a few long minutes we simply stared at each other, the 30 camels and I. They looked around anxiously as I pedaled away, without giving them a drink. Late in the day, I did find more water for myself. The land had a large natural bowl, 50 meters in diameter, but not very deep. At the lowest point, a concrete shell was submerged into the earth. No animals were in sight, but all the tracks and poop indicated that they knew the spot. A bucket was in the well, tied to a rope. I brought up water to refill my empty bottles, but even after using my filter, there was still a yellow tinge. I took a drink and tasted the essence of Mongolia, the dry earth and the animals. Forever after this journey, whenever I catch the scent of livestock on the wind, I will think of this place. As I swallowed, the thought occurred to me that the water is no different than drinking out of a barn drain, and tasted as such. I decided to save those bottles as a last resort. I watched the full moon rise through soft pink clouds. Evening was approaching, and I was looking for a place to sleep when a Toyota Land Cruiser and an old flatbed truck came up the road behind me. They stopped and 3 men got out, curious to see what I was doing. I told them I was on my way to Katambulag, and the man driving the truck offered me a ride, saying that he was going there too. I was feeling the stress of being alone and unsure in the barren desert. If I could get to town, my map showed a road starting again. Then I wouldn't feel so lost. I accepted the ride and felt relief as I loaded my bike onto the truck. The 2 men in the cab were in their 40s and had each other laughing the whole ride. We talked about the simple things that we could without sharing a language. The driver showed me pictures of his children and wife. The man between us had a big smile on his face and joked that he didn't have a wife because he drinks too much. He seemed a little drunk. We drove fast as the sun set and the stars came out. In the dim headlights, the driver swerved left and right at forks in the road. When antelope appeared out of the darkness ahead, the driver would shift to neutral and rev his engine to make them move. I mimed a rifle to ask if they could be hunted, and the man in the middle answered by pretending to be wearing handcuffs. At some point, the Land Cruiser we were following became lost. The drivers got out to confer, pointing into the darkness. The Land Cruiser left, then 10 minutes later, the driver was flashing his lights in the distance for us to follow. They were going to a relative's home to pick up goats, and this is where we eventually arrived. Not the town, as I was expecting, but at a yurt no closer to town than when they found me. The reason I took the ride was to not feel so lost, but by the time we stopped, I had no clue where I was and could no longer retrace my steps. The men brought me into the yurt where a cheerful woman was cooking goat meat stew over a single burner connected to a small propane tank. 2 children slept on the floor against the wall, and an old man sat quietly in the back. As the guest, I was given a 6-inch tall plastic stool to sit on. Everyone else sat right on the ground. While we waited for the stew to finish cooking, I was served a clean 6-inch bone out of the pot. I chewed off the last scraps of meat, then set the bone back on my plate. The driver of the truck asked if I was finished, then took the bone to nibble off every little piece of gristle and tendon before breaking the hard outer layer to suck out the marrow. I saw the bone as a food scrap, while he was still looking at an appetizer. The family scene was lovely and warm. The night carried on with laughter and good food, and all the while, the old man sat in the back, speaking little, looking content, and farting loudly. Everyone ignored his near-constant gas, but after a half hour, I was becoming concerned for his health. That's when I realized the gaseous chorus was actually coming from the goats behind him, lying on the other side of the thin wall of the yurt. No one paid any attention because goat farts were the background noise of every evening. When we finished eating, I wanted to get away from the yurt to find a place to sleep, but the guys I drove in with didn't like the idea of me being on the ground. They had me put my sleeping bag next to them on the wooden floor of the goat truck. Now they are all snoring loudly. The goats are continuing to fart, and noisy camels are here too, murmuring in the darkness. Right here where I'm lying is possibly the noisiest spot for 50 miles in every direction. August 22nd, 2013. Across the Void. I left quickly in the morning, not wanting to get caught up in an extended goodbye. Again, my directions to Katambulag were a few hand signals and a long explanation in a language I didn't understand. The gist was that I had to go north, then later turn east. The yurt was barely out of sight when I came across an old car parked next to the road, and a family eating breakfast of tea, sugar cookies, and instant noodle soup. The mother waved for me to join along with her husband and 2 children. I was sipping on a cup of tea when 3 guys on a motorcycle came down the road and also stopped to sit with us. 10 minutes later, we all went our separate ways. That was the only traffic I would see for the rest of the day. Several hours later, I was lost again. A feeling of quiet desperation settled over me as I scrutinized the details of my surroundings for any clues to help me figure out where I was. The path wound between parched black hills which blocked me from seeing into the distance. Without a map or any landmarks for navigation, I was left with only my compass bearing, and I was going the wrong way. When I'm lost on my bicycle, my inclination in the past has been to take a guess, not go very far, then return to the same spot without any more information to help me make a decision. I've learned that I have to commit to going until I know for certain whether I'm on the right path or not. Today, in an extreme test of willpower, I pedaled for hours in what I thought was the wrong direction, but I wasn't sure. I was just about to turn around when I unexpectedly came upon a mining camp. The compound was a collection of white buildings with red rooftops, including dorms, offices, and a cafeteria. I stepped inside to find 3 people working at desks. A man playing poker on his computer paused his game and came to help me. After telling him I was lost, he invited me to the cafeteria for fresh bread and butter. 3 women were all in the lull between cleaning up from breakfast and preparing to cook lunch. I saw them laughing at a picture on a smartphone and realized they were connected to the internet. I got out my tablet and logged on to the most remote Wi-Fi connection I have ever found. I was able to bring up Google Maps and get a satellite view that showed me tracks in the sand that would take me to the next town. I was so happy. I knew where I was, and I knew where I was going. The man from the office invited me to use his bed to take a nap. He insisted. With the satellite image saved, I felt such relief that I managed to fall asleep. Lunch was being served when the man came back to wake me. I walked into the cafeteria, and the whole room went silent as 150 shirtless Mongolian men turned to stare at me. We were all surprised that I was there. A murmur began as I was given a tray of meat and vegetable stew served so hot that I burned my mouth and began to sweat. One of the miners excitedly called to me in clear English, "Come sit with us," and made room at his table. I asked about his English, and he told me that he's been studying so he won't have to work in the mine anymore. He was younger than me, but had a wife and 3 children that he has to leave for weeks at a time. The other men at the table began asking questions that he translated for me. I told them my bike and gear weighed 65 kilograms, which got a nod of approval. When asked where I sleep, I explained that I simply lay on the ground. They asked about snakes, and I just shrugged, saying I don't worry about them. I could see they were uneasy with the idea. I told them that I was 29 years old and unmarried. They laughed and said that in Mongolia, I was old to not be married. To explain what I was doing there, my translator colorfully painted me as a crazy American, going to closed borders and getting lost in the desert. At this, the whole table erupted in laughter. He did have a point. We ended the lunch with a discussion about the size of my nose. The group of 6 men came outside to see my bike. They squeezed the tires, pulled the brake levers, and wrapped their knuckles on the hard leather seat. I could see on their faces that they could hardly believe what I was doing. I thanked the man who had been translating and shook the hands of the others. They watched me pedal away, and soon I was out of sight. In the evening, I found a small oasis. Water bubbled out of the ground, grass grew thickly, and a thin black snake climbed among the surrounding rocks. A shrine was there, sheltered inside an open yurt made of concrete. The altar was covered with burnt incense, and painted on the curved wall behind was a mural of Genghis Khan leading a long line of mounted soldiers. I rinsed my face in the cool water and felt the stress of my situation dissipate. Across the wide flat beyond the spring was Khatan Bulag. I set up camp 8 miles away, but I can still see the town, no more than a few small buildings illuminated in the bright white moonlight. I have another 200 miles to get back to the Chinese border, but I've navigated the land and my emotions far enough to know that I will get there. August 23, 2013, still in the desert. The temperature reached 90 degrees while I was still eating breakfast. My water bottles were full of spring water, and I saw on the map that I would be passing through a town in the evening. All day I savored the feeling of abundant water. I drank indiscriminately. I drank until my stomach ached. I was so happy. Toward the end of the day, I reached the town as planned and stopped to buy supplies. The owner gave me chewing gum and a wafer cookie. Another man handed me a few sticks of the same pale yellow cheese I've been offered across Mongolia. I took a bite and felt a few strands of animal fur in my mouth. All the cheese that I've eaten like this has had strands of fur throughout. I'm not sure if this is an inevitable part of living close to animals, or if some fur is added as a sort of binding agent. I didn't want to ask in case I would be insulting them to point out the hair in their food. I met a couple of teenage boys before I left, then a few miles away, out of sight of the town, they caught up to me with their motorcycles with 2 more of their friends alongside. I felt outnumbered and nervous as they surrounded me, but I didn't need to be. They brought their friends just to look, and without saying anything, we stared at each other for a long minute. One of the boys cracked a joke that made them all laugh, then they turned and drove away. I felt like a zoo animal. Tonight, I've got my sleeping bag laid out in an area away from the road. A bright orange moon is rising into a deep purple sky, and the landscape is calm and beautiful. After a long day of biking, I'm feeling a little beaten up. I jarred my shin when I put my foot down hard to catch myself from falling. My wrists are stiff from all the bouncing, and my butt is in a fair bit of pain for the same reason. My body needs a day of rest, but there is nowhere good to stop. When I took a short break this afternoon, I simply stood in the sun in silence while the sweat dripped into my eyes. I've accepted that there will be no respite until I get out of this desert. Katie has been on my mind as well. I continue to send her emails every night, but the infrequent Wi-Fi causes weeks to pass between writing and getting a response, as though I were sending actual letters. She has been with me through these empty stretches of desert, lightening my spirit whenever my mind wanders to her, and inspiring me to be brave in my hardest moments. I miss her. August 24th, 2013. A hot day. I spent the morning on and off my bike, slowly crossing a sandy plain rimmed by low rippling hills. Later, the road turned to washboard that forced me to a walking pace. Going any faster caused my gear to rattle so violently I was afraid something would break. I pedaled slowly and listened to the sound of my tires rolling over the earth. The grass-speckled landscape changed little as I went. I pulled into a small town around noon. The temperature was 100 degrees, and the buildings were the only shade I had seen all morning. I found a little one-room grocery store where I could buy juice and water, and I sat outside against the tin wall. Soon, children started to find me, and within 10 minutes, 7 of them were watching me eat lunch. They slowly grew bored and wandered away, then came back as I was leaving to wave goodbye. After a hot day, the sun found the horizon and the air began to cool. I pulled off the road for the night at the top of a hill and took off my tattered shirt to let the warm breeze wash over me. I captured the moment on my camera. I am basking in the sunlight, my shaggy hair and beard circling my face like a lion's mane. Purple clouds hang in the sky, and the Mongolian steppe stretches to the horizon. I look strong and proud. That picture is my summit photo. I have reached the peak that I've been climbing toward since Portugal. At the start of this journey, I had the intention to get very far out there, geographically and in spirit. I wanted to leave the bounds of society and become wild. I didn't know specifically what that would look like, but I feel I have arrived. I've embraced solitude and watched my clothes turn to rags. I sleep on the earth and have the whole sky to myself. This is just what I wanted. I feel serene. Right now is perfect. August 25th, 2013. Last day in Mongolia. A herd of horses came by in the night, grunting and sneezing in the dark. We crossed paths again this morning. 30 of them trotted alongside me for over a mile. I appreciated their company. Goats, sheep, and cows watch me pass. Horses are the only ones who join. I spent the day bouncing through the desert, trying to find the most solid track to get myself east. Progress was slow, and the temperature hovered around 90 degrees. I struggled onward into the late afternoon before I finally saw what I was looking for. Far in the distance were a few tractor trailers moving silently across the land. They were on the highway that would take me to China's border. I listened to the traffic grow louder for an hour before I pulled onto the paved shoulder. Pausing there, I took a moment to silently celebrate. If I were more dramatic, I would have kissed the pavement. I stopped to camp with the border only 10 miles away, close enough to see. I would present myself to China in the morning, and I look undeniably rough. My long-sleeve shirt has completely deteriorated. I keep the shirt on for the sleeves, but at this point, more sun gets through than is blocked. The holes have grown so large and numerous that the fabric has taken on the appearance of a spider web. I rather like watching my shirts fall apart. I'm waiting for the wind to take them from my body. My pants, on the other hand, are getting better. After 5 weeks without washing, they have become so stiff with dirt and sweat that I now feel protected when I fall. The rest of my gear is covered with a striking red powder, as though a sunset has turned to dust. 2 men on a motorcycle found me as I was cooking dinner and pointed out that I was sleeping next to a patch of onion grass. One of them plucked a strand and took a bite to show me that they were edible. I thanked them for the tip, then added a few blades to my rice. I was still hungry when I finished my dinner and wondered if I could eat the other grass around me. Over the past month, I've seen thousands of grazing animals. I never thought I'd join them. I've eaten all my food and saved only one swallow of water for morning. I'll be arriving at the end of Mongolia on an empty stomach, thirsty, aching, and tired. This feels fitting. Now, I'm seated on the ground, watching the lingering sunset. My legs are exhausted, and I'm emotionally depleted. Reaching this border crossing after being rejected at the last one has required a depth of fortitude I did not know I had. The dire situation forced my focus to become clear and absolute, my legs to be strong and tireless, and my resolve to harden against the torrent of fear and doubt I was feeling. Never before have I had to do something so difficult, with so little confidence, and such high stakes. I believe I reached the pinnacle of my capabilities. Going forward, I will compare all other experiences to this one, and my life will forever feel easier.